Chapter 10:14. Matthew and Godotzi were the only two people who were surprised. That's right. I think you have also noticed that we don't have much food left, and all the humans in Mesopotamia have gathered in the Uruk. Although there is no problem for the time being, in a few days, the shortage of food will appear, and we will be in trouble. Godotzi and Matthew heard Wuming's words and instantly understood. After all, they were modern people, and they could understand what would happen in the Uruk through the usual compulsory education. At that time, humans would starve to death because they were trapped in the Uruk without food, and in serious cases there might be riot. After all, appetite was one of the most basic desires of humans, and there was no way to suppress it. Once it broke out, it would be more terrible than a natural disaster. Outside the Uruk were Ramu, and humans could not go out to look for food. Only servants could do it, but there was no way to get food for so many people with only a few servants. Therefore, the only way was to take the initiative to attack, and the main attacker was Wuming. Wuming talked to Gilgamesh last night about this matter, and Gilgamesh also agreed. In fact, whether we take the initiative to attack or wait for Tiamat to attack, our chances of winning are very low. Leonardo da Vinci's voice came from Godotzi's bracelet. After all, the opponent was the god of creation. So, whether we take the initiative to attack or passively defend, the probability of winning is almost the same. Although Roman's words were discouraged, it also meant that taking the initiative to attack was better than passively defending. Why didn't Tiamat take the initiative to attack? Godotzi was quite puzzled. That's because Mother is bound. Enkidu stood up. Bound? Matthew could not help but be stunned. And that's the binding that Tiamat put on herself. Wuming interrupted. What? Whether it was Godotzi, Matthew, or the others, they were more or less surprised by this. Why? Godotzi asked. She didn't understand why she would impose restrictions on herself. Because Mother has always loved humans and their children, that's why she added restrictions to herself. Enkidu, who had fused with Kingu, was well aware of this. Wuming had also asked Enkidu about this last night. At this moment, Gilgamesh, who was sitting on the throne, suddenly interrupted. Do you know that humans are evil? Humans are evil. Godotzi and Matthew looked at each other in confusion. The two goddesses, Quizzard and Ishtar, had a serious look in their eyes. It was obvious that the two of them knew that humans were evil. Humans are evil. Roman from Chaldea repeated silently. Humans are evil beasts of original sin. There are a total of 7 original sin beasts, and they are disasters that can destroy humans. Merlin also spoke, but in the end it was still Roman who explained. Humans are evil refers to various disasters that threaten human history and destroy humans. They are born from human civilization and grow stronger with the development of human civilization. They will destroy the civilization from the inside of human society. They are like cancer cells. Furthermore, as long as human beings exist, this evil will not disappear. It will grow stronger with the development of human civilization. To put it simply, it was an existence that accompanied humans. Because of the disasters caused by the bestial nature of humans, humans are also called beasts. Tiamat is the second beast that holds the principle of return, Beast 2. Merlin finished Roman's sentence, then looked at Wuming and signaled for Wuming to continue. With a helpless smile, Wuming spoke. The essence of human evil is human love. It is precisely because of this that Tiamat, who loves her lover and her children, will become one of the human evils. Godotzi and Matthew suddenly understood. After that, Wuming inexplicably thought of the human final trial he encountered in the box garden world. Moreover, human evil is not the evil that destroys humans, but the evil that destroys humans. That is, the existence that humans need to overcome. Only by overcoming it can humans continue to develop. Therefore, in a sense, it is not wrong to call it the human final trial. After all, human evil is a disaster for humans, and it is not wrong to call it the human final trial. The existence that needs to be overcome, human final trial. Matthew and Gadotsi, who were present as humans, muttered silently. Seeing Gadotsi and Matthew in deep thought, Wuming walked in front of the two, stretched out his hand, and gave them a knock on the head. "Ah, it hurts! Senior Villo." Gadotsi covered her head with tears and looked at Wuming. Matthew performed better than Gadotsi. He did not cry out in pain, but she also covered her head. Although it is said that the human final trial needs humans to overcome it, it is just a formality. It is not necessary for humans to overcome it. For the self-destruction mechanism of humans, such as the 7 human evils, the suppression force has already prepared a corresponding safety device, which is the 7 crowned servants. The shaped moon world is different from the box garden world. In the box garden world, the human final trial is a special existence. To defeat, kill, or even overcome the other party requires special conditions. The most critical condition is that you must have the identity of a human. The human final trial in the shaped moon world is just a title that Wuming casually said. It has no special power, so humans do not need to overcome it personally. Seeing the doubts on their faces, Wuming directly gave an example. The first Hassan you have seen is the crown assassin. These words directly made Gadotsi and Matthew almost fall to the ground. They knew that the first Hassan was very strong, but they didn't expect the other party to have such an identity. In other words, the reason why the first Hassan helped us is because of the appearance of one of the human evils? However, no one answered Gadotsi's question. Because the people present were very clear that Tiamat had undergone a qualitative change. She was no longer a simple human evil. Even the first Hassan couldn't even get close to Tiamat. All of this was attributed to the root black mud, and it was precisely because of this that Wuming took all the burden on himself. Emotionally, only Wuming could deal with Tiamat, who was infected with the root black mud. Others were easily eroded by the black mud and assimilated. Reasonably, the root black mud and Wuming had a great relationship. The reason why Tiamat was infected with the root black mud may have an indirect relationship with Wuming. Therefore, Wuming had to take on this burden. In short, my trump card can deal with Tiamat. You just need to be responsible for covering me. Chapter 10:15. Wuming said as he stretched out his hands and rubbed Gadotsi and Matthew's little heads. In fact, Wuming didn't mention one thing. He was worried that Tiamat had other means. Therefore, Wuming chose to let himself, the only one who was not afraid of the black root soil, face Tiamat, so as not to let other people have an accident. After being attached by the black root soil, in addition to being hostile to Wuming, their own abilities would also be changed or enhanced. That is, the enemy who was already very powerful would become even stronger. As the god of creation, Tiamat was already very strong, and with the blessing of the black root soil, she would definitely become stronger, and maybe she would have some new trick. The best way was to let some people stay in the Uruk. Wuming had already talked to Gilgamesh about this issue last night. Therefore, Gilgamesh directly ordered, "Now, let's discuss the problem of grouping. After that, let's face the god of creation and launch the final attack." The humans in the Uruk were still doing their duty, and even most of the soldiers were arranged by Gilgamesh to do something within their ability. Only some soldiers were still guarding the 360-degree city wall surrounding the Uruk, and their task was only to be stationed on the city wall to monitor the movements of the Ramu army outside. After all, ordinary human soldiers were not useful at all in this counterattack strategy. Although it was cruel to say that, human soldiers couldn't do anything in the face of the Ramu army except to die and increase the combat power of the Ramu army. On the city wall in the southwest corner of the Uruk, Gilgamesh, Gadotsi, Matthew, the followers, and several Quizzards pterosaurs gathered together. However, Everyone was clearly divided into two teams and stood in front of Gilgamesh. Quizzard, Ishtar, Gudatsi, Matthew, Merlin, Nawakamaru, and Musasobo Benkei were responsible for covering Wuming. Enkidu, Funbaba, Leonidas I, Anna, and Leopard Man were responsible for guarding the Uruk with Gilgamesh. Quizzard and Ishtar were very powerful goddesses, so naturally, they wouldn't choose to stay behind. Although Nawakamaru was a general-like figure, his class was rider, and his mobility wasn't low, he was more suitable for taking the initiative to attack. After Musasobo Benkei overcame his fear, he had to follow Nawakamaru no matter when and where, unless he died. Nawakamaru had to admit that this made her feel very helpless. Although she was very pleased that Sea Lord Chang Lu had become so brave, there was no need for him to become so excessive, it was almost becoming an obsession. Therefore, Nawakamaru and Musasobo Benkei were assigned to the attack team, and Leonidas I was forced to stay behind because of his strong defensive ability. Enkidu and Funbaba were instructed by Wuming to stay behind, and Anna also stayed behind because of Wuming's concern. After all, Anna still needed to protect the Holy Grail where Sakuramadu was. As for the Leopard Man, he was instructed by Quizzard to stay behind. According to Quizzard's words, don't underestimate the Leopard Man, however, anyone could tell that this wasn't the real reason. In short, Wuming was relieved to have a good defensive team guarding the Uruk. Moreover, there was also Zhuge Kongming, who hadn't shown his face since returning to the Uruk. Wuming believed that even if there was an accident, the Uruk would be safe with the presence of staying behind. As for why Merlin joined the attack team, it was entirely because he was coerced by Wuming. With Gilgamesh and Zhuge Kongming, there was no need for Merlin to stay behind at all. In addition, Merlin had been pretending to be weak, so Wuming, who was a little unhappy, made this decision. Finally, it was Gudatsi and Matthew. Gudatsi and Matthew could stay in the Uruk. There was no need for them to go out and take risk. Although Gudatsi and Matthew's decision was strongly opposed by the two at first, after listening to Gudatsi's reason, the way everyone looked at Gudatsi changed. Human evil needs to be overcome by humans. I won't and don't want to escape. Even if the main attacker was Wuming, Gudatsi believed that as the only master of mankind and one of the last remaining humans, she had to bear witness to all this. It didn't matter even if the end was really death. Wuming was very sure that Gudatsi was touched by his previous words. Although he was worried about Gudatsi's safety, Wuming also felt gratified for Gudatsi at the same time. It was the kind of gratification that one would feel when seeing their younger sister grow up. And not only Wuming, but the others were also touched by this. If Quizzard and Ishtar still regarded Gudatsi as an immature little girl before, now, they have regarded Gudatsi as a real qualified master. Matthew was affected by Gudatsi's strong inner feelings and supported Gudatsi's idea. Moreover, as Gudatsi's follower, Matthew had no reason to let his master go to the front line alone. Therefore, Matthew would also follow Quizzard and others to cover Wuming. For the decision of the two, Gilgamesh also praised Gudatsi and Matthew, saying that there really are people in the future who didn't let this king down. At this moment, Gilgamesh faced the people who were divided into two teams and repeated the content of the plan. The defense team will stay with this king in Uruk to prevent accidents or provide support. The attack team needs to take Quizzard's pterosaur to the Persian Gulf, and then fully cover Hyunryong to release his trump card to eliminate Tiamat. Of course, your own safety is the prerequisite, that's all. Is there a problem? No. Although only Gudatsi and Matthew answered, in fact, Gilgamesh was talking to Gudatsi and Matthew. After all, everyone else was a servant. To put it bluntly, the servant's body was not the servant's body. If they died, they would die and there would be no image. But if Gudatsi and Matthew, as human beings, had an accident, there would be no room for recovery. Then, Roman's voice came from Gudatsi's bracelet. According to the detection, The number of Ramu on the land has exceeded 300 million, and it is still increasing. The speed of the increase of Ramu is also rising rapidly. Roman and Leonardo da Vinci in Chaldea looked at the number of Ramu on the screen that was still increasing, and they couldn't help but frown. Although this was bad news, there was also good news at the same time. However, these Ramu can only move on the ground. There are no aerial units yet. After all, there was already the winged mermaid Kururu that could fly in the sky, so Roman also paid attention to it. But there is no guarantee that there will not be any enemy flying units, so when you get close to Tiamat, you must be very careful. Don't relax your vigilance against the Ramu just because they can fly. Leonardo da Vinci also warned. Of course, he was still talking to Gadazzi and Matthew. Yes, we understand, Leonardo da Vinci. Gadazzi nodded seriously. Finally, as the Uruk king, Gilgamesh issued the final order. So, let's go, everyone. This king is looking forward to your triumphant return. Chapter 10:16. The three Quetzalcoatlus carried Gadazzi, Matthew, Nwakamaru, Musasobo Benkei, and Merlin respectively. Quizzard rode on her exclusive Quetzalcoatlus and flew into the sky with the five of them. Ishtar and Wuming both had their own means of flight, so they didn't need Quizzard's Quetzalcoatlus. Under the gaze of the few people stationed in Uruk led by Gilgamesh, the four Quetzalcoatlus, Tianzhou, and a figure who flew into the sky without catching any tools left one after another. Thus, the plan to counterattack Tiamat officially began. In a place where no one could see, Gilgamesh's mouth moved slightly. The future of mankind, please. Because Ramu didn't have the ability to fly, and Kururu was close to extinction, the attack team didn't encounter any obstacles in the sky. They soon arrived at the original Persian Gulf coastline. The reason why it was called the original Persian Gulf coastline was because this place had long been submerged by the sea of black mud, and the sky had long been covered by dark clouds, and no trace of sunlight could be seen. Roman, who had repeatedly confirmed the location through the electronic map in Chaldea, spoke with great certainty from Gadazzi's bracelet. "It's here." Looking at her bracelet, Gadazzi nodded, then looked at Wuming, who was flying beside her. "From here on out, we must be vigilant." After all, the real sea was in front of them, and the depth was different from the submerged land. There was no guarantee that there would be something hidden. In that case, let's fly higher first. After Quizzard finished speaking, the four Quetzalcoatlus all flew higher. Gadazzi was wearing a special magic dress made by Leonardo da Vinci. Even if they flew higher, it wouldn't affect Gadazzi's breathing. Ishtar also increased his altitude. On the other hand, Wu Ming did not increase his altitude. In fact, he even lowered his altitude. That's right, he did this to cover everyone, which was the so-called bait. Danger was often called danger, because it was often hidden in the dark. If the hidden danger could be brought to the light, then Gadazzi and the others would be much safer. Naturally, Wuming, who was the strongest, would take the risk. And Wuming didn't believe that there was no danger in the sea of black mud. Sure enough, a mouth full of black mud suddenly jumped out of the black mud and bit at Wuming. It wasn't exactly a bite because this bloody mouth could swallow Wuming in one bite. The kind. Assassin? Gadazzi, who was high in the sky, couldn't help but shout. She didn't see Wuming escape from this giant mouth. Could Wuming have been eaten? The answer was, of course, no. "Senior, look over there. Senior Villo is there." Matthew touched Gadazzi and pointed to the sky in the distance. Wuming's figure was floating there steadily, and beside Wuming was a dark purple portal. So Assassin managed to escape. I almost forgot about that ability of his. Phew, Gadazzi was relieved and took a deep breath. But what is this thing? Gadazzi was naturally talking about the big mouth of the muddy basin below. That's the mouth of a magical beast, Ishtar, who was holding Anna on her horse, said quietly as she flew to Gudatsi and Matthew's side. The mouth of a magical beast? This frightened the two girls. The mouth below was so big that it could eat 4 or 5 people in one bite. How big was the body of such a magical beast? Gudatsi and Matthew weren't the only ones who wanted to see the true face of this magical beast. Others also wanted to know, including Wuming. He wanted to see what the true face of this magical beast that he couldn't detect with his mental strength was. At that moment, Wuming waved his hand, and a book full of ancient meanings suddenly appeared in Wuming's hand. This was a nameless spellbook. Every page represented a magic spell, and the further down the page, the higher the level of the magical beast, and the more powerful the spell was. The book moved without wind, and the pages were flipped. Finally, it stopped on a page. This page represented a supreme spell, and it was the kind that didn't require the skill to be shaken and could be used directly. Then, Wuming tore off this page and threw it into the portal beside him that hadn't closed yet. Pa! Wuming snapped his fingers, and the portal closed immediately. However, in the next second, the huge closed mouth suddenly expanded, then suddenly contracted, and then expanded again. The huge mouth opened towards the sky, and the blue and white light of destruction shot straight into the sky. With the huge mouth as the center, the sea of black mud also shook violently. The light of destruction brushed past the feathered serpent that Gudatsi and Matthew were riding, and it gave Gudatsi, Matthew, and the winged serpent a fright. Fufu! Fufu suddenly jumped out of Matthew's shield and howled a few times at the huge mouth below. It seemed that he was also frightened. Fufu? Did you hide in the storage compartment of my shield again? Matthew's shield had been modified by Leonardo da Vinci. It could be used to store supplies or to store recycled holy grails, and Fufu had hidden in it more than once. Worried that Fufu would accidentally fall, Matthew hurriedly hugged Fufu in his arms. You should have stayed in Uruk, Fufu. However, it was useless to say anything at this moment. The key was the true face of the magical beast with the huge mouth. It was a huge dog. Or rather, it was the World of Warcraft Eulidium. Roar! Due to the influence of Wuming's supreme spell, a lot of the black mud on the huge mouth was shaken off, and because of the shaking, the body under the huge mouth was also exposed. It was a huge red-haired dog on all fours, and there was even a lot of black mud on its red hair. The World of Warcraft Eulidium? Gudatsi couldn't believe it. This was a magical beast that was even bigger than the magical beast commander. At this moment, the winged serpent carrying Merlin approached, and Merlin's voice also reached Gudatsi's ears. This is the real son that Tiamat gave birth to alone, one of the 11 sons of Tiamat, the World of Warcraft Eulidium. That's right, it was neither a mass-produced magical beast nor a so-called magical beast commander, but one of the 11 sons of Tiamat, the World of Warcraft Eulidium. I'm afraid that this Black Sea has already become Tiamat's nest. Roman's voice also came from the bracelet. And Tiamat has probably produced all the other magical beasts, Leonardo da Vinci said. As if confirming Leonardo da Vinci's words, Eulidium howled. A woo! Accompanied by this wolf-like howl, huge figures emerged from the sea of black mud one after another. Chapter 10:17. One after another, huge figures emerged from the sea of black mud. Black mud fell from their bodies bit by bit, revealing their figures. Eulidium, who had the appearance of a wolf dog, the venomous snake Bashmu, the huge sun lion Ugal, the three-horned lion dragon Ugal, the seven-headed snake Muxiomafu, the demonic bull Kuthalaku, who had abandoned the appearance of a human bull and appeared on all fours, Kitabliru, who had also abandoned the appearance of a scorpion and turned into a giant scorpion, Mashuxiu, who had 4 legs, the angry snake Kururu, who had abandoned the appearance of a mermaid and turned into a giant fish. Beast Umdebrutu, who had obtained the appearance of a shark and was known as the Tempest, and Tiamat's last son, the Chaos Mudman with the same name and identity as the Father of Gods, Rum. These were the 11 sons of Tiamat. At the same time, they were also the existences that prevented Wuming from getting close to Tiamat. Gudatsi and the others had to protect Wuming from the danger he had to face. Trouble. Even Wuming did not expect that the 11 sons of Tiamat would all appear. However, this was probably the power of the black mud that sped up the birth of Tiamat's new 11 sons. The reason why it was called the 11 sons was because the real 11 sons had died long ago. Moreover, these 11 magical beasts were more or less different from the ones recorded in the historical myth. At this moment, the bodies of the magical beasts were basically extremely huge, and the humanoid magical beasts had all turned into their beast forms. The formless de Brutu had also turned into a giant shark. Obviously, this was a temporary change made by Tiamat. After all, this was the only way they were real, magical beasts. However, Wuming was more concerned about the Ramu. It wasn't much different from the other Ramu in Mesopotamia. At the very least, it wasn't as large as the other Ramu. It was about the same size as the other Ramu, but it was also different from the other mass-produced Ramu. This Ramu's body was not as weak as other mass-produced Ramu. On the contrary, this Ramu's body was abnormally strong. It was even more fit than a bodybuilder. Wuming was sure that this guy was not just for show, but for real. In addition, this Ramu also had a pair of large wings on its back, but they were curled up, so it was hard to tell how big they were. In short, among the 11 magical beasts, Wuming felt that this Ramu was the strongest. WMBFLL, YBFDFCXXDMQCSDJH, YBFQWLK, CDXMRL. The Ramu said something to the other magical beasts, and the 11 magical beasts immediately divided into 2 groups. 5 magical beasts advanced towards the Uruk. Wuming, who could understand the Ramu's words, understood the other party's meaning. They wanted to split into 2 groups. One group would go to the Uruk to completely destroy the humans, and the other group would stay to deal with them. It seemed that these 11 magical beasts had not been lurking for a long time. They were probably just born not long ago. Otherwise, they wouldn't have waited until Wuming and the others attacked the Uruk before going to the Uruk. After all, if 11 of them attacked the Uruk together, the Uruk's light film would most likely not be able to stop them. Fortunately, Wuming had the foresight to let Enkidu, Funbaba, and the others stay in the Uruk. Although it was not foolproof, it was enough. These 11 magical beasts were extremely powerful. Wuming even had the idea that if they fought alone, Quizzard and Ishtar might not necessarily be the opponents of these magical beasts. However, their goal was not to kill these 11 magical beasts. As long as they delayed these magical beasts and let Wuming deal with Tiamat during this time, everything would be over. However, these magical beasts seemed to be quite smart. After the 5 magical beasts left for the Uruk, the remaining 6 magical beasts all rushed towards Wuming. Only Wuming had the ability to threaten Tiamat, which the magical beasts knew very well. However, Wuming appeared next to Gudatsi with a teleportation portal, causing the 6 magical beasts to miss their target. "Assassin, what should we do now?" Gudatsi was a little anxious at this moment. However, there was no other way because Roman had been relaying information about the enemy. Each of these 11 magical beasts has magical power comparable to or even surpassing the Holy Grail. Their strength has even reached the level of the King of God. Even Quizzard, the Quetzalcoatl, has a very low chance of winning against one of them. If the goddess Ishtar faces one of them, she is likely to be killed. "It's really over this time?" Roman's anxious and panicked voice kept coming out of Gudatsi's bracelet. "Are these magical beasts so powerful?" Matthew was also shocked. After all, she was still immature. She could only sense that these magical beasts were very dangerous, but she did not know how dangerous they were. Don't forget that even Ishtar's father is Tiamat's grandson. These magical beasts are Tiamat's sons. It's understandable that they have the power of the king of gods. Wu Ming's words were not unreasonable. If Tiamat's magical beasts were weak, then they were not qualified to fight against the heavenly gods. After all, they would be killed directly by the heavenly god. Being able to fight against the heavenly gods meant that the 11 sons of Tiamat were very powerful. It could only be said that the previous magical beast commanders were the weaker versions of these 11 magical beasts, and the mass-produced magical beasts were the extremely weak versions of these 11 magical beasts. These 11 magical beasts were the 11 sons of Tiamat. No, it should be strengthened by the black mud. Otherwise, Tiamat would not have given birth to the 11 sons so quickly, and the 11 sons would not have such powerful strength. It could be said that if these 11 magical beasts replaced the original 11 sons, the scales of victory might have tilted towards Tiamat's side. Therefore, these magical beasts must have been strengthened by the black mud. Assassin, go directly to Tiamat. We'll hold these magical beasts back. Gudatsi made a prompt decision and issued an order. However, as a master, Gudatsi was still too inexperienced. However, Wu Ming shook his head. It's impossible for you to beat these guys. You won't even be able to drag it out for long. Not to mention anything else, Gudatsi's combat power was 0. Even if Matthew was included, excluding Wu Ming, there were only 5 of them, and there were 6 magical beasts here. Roman's words just now were very clear. Quizzard's chances of winning were very low, and Ishtar might even be killed directly. There was one more thing that Roman didn't mention. Even Merlin could only rely on illusion to survive. It was difficult to win in a 1-on-1 situation, let alone a 5-on-6 situation. What's more, there was another extremely frustrating thing. 5 against 6 was just a hypothesis because Matthew, Nawakamaru, and Mizusobo Benkei were useless at this moment. Therefore, the real situation was actually 2 against 6. Chapter 10:18. Then what do we do now? Everyone turned their attention to Wu Ming, including Merlin. Wu Ming looked at the 6 magical beasts that were charging at them again, thought for a moment, and then said something that made everyone dumbfounded. I'll hold off these 6 magical beasts, you guys go snipe Tiamat. As soon as he said that, everyone's eyes widened. Wait a minute, you're going to deal with 6 magical beasts? Gudatsi said worriedly. The strength of these magical beasts was obvious to all. This was no joke. I'm afraid we can't kill Tiamat. This sentence came from Merlin. The 6 magical beasts only attacked Wu Ming and ignored the others. This meant that only Wu Ming had the ability to threaten Tiamat. If they couldn't even defeat these magical beasts, how could they deal with Tiamat? There was another point that others didn't know, but Merlin knew very well. First, Hassan couldn't even get close to Tiamat now, let alone them. Without the strength, they probably couldn't even get close. How could they fight? However, Wu Ming's words changed. That's why I asked you guys to snipe. That's right, Wu Ming didn't think that they could get close to Tiamat, but they didn't need to, they could just snipe from afar. Immediately, everyone turned their attention to Ishtar. Ishtar was stunned at first, then held her head and looked like she was about to break down. Wait a minute, I can't even defeat these magical beasts, how can I deal with Tiamat? Ishtar's eyes were filled with tears, and she looked like she was going to die. This was a good reason, but, don't you still have Gugalana? Wu Ming spread his hands and suddenly looked like he didn't care. TSK. Suddenly, Ishtar's body froze. However, Gudatsi and Matthew looked happy. Right, I almost forgot that Miss Ishtar has the Bull of Heaven. Ishtar. It's up to you now. The 2 of them cheered Ishtar on. If it doesn't work, we'll just use Gugalan to escape and switch places with me. Without waiting for Ishtar's response, Wu Ming turned around and flew downwards. Because the 6 magical beasts had already arrived. Good luck, Mistress of the Heavens, Ishtar. I have high hopes for you. After Wuming said some words of encouragement, he directly started fighting with the 6 magical beasts. There's no time to lose. Let's go over first. At that moment, Quizzard also seized the opportunity created by Wuming and commanded the pterosaurs to fly towards Tiamat. Wait a minute. Ishtar's sorrowful cries served as a prelude to the battle between Wuming and the 6 magical beasts. On the Uruk side, Gilgamesh had already returned to the top of the divine tower. He did not do anything and just closed his eyes and waited quietly. Enkidu and Funbaba were playing by the side, while Leonidas I, Anna, and the leopard man stayed on the southwest wall of the Uruk. At some point, Gilgamesh's aura changed, and then Enkidu spoke. Gil, what are you worried about? However, Gilgamesh, who opened his eyes, shook his head. It's just a bunch of random thoughts. In response, Enkidu smiled mysteriously. In that case, Enkidu decided to change the topic. Sir Hyunryong will definitely succeed. We just need to protect the Uruk, or rather, protect you, the king of humans in this era. It's about time. Gilgamesh, who was leaning against the throne, rested his face on his arm and glanced toward the southwest. Boom! The sound of a boulder hitting the ground echoed in the sky, and the entire Uruk was shaken. Looks like it's here. Enkidu stopped smiling and hugged Funbaba. That's right, both Enkidu and Gilgamesh knew that the Uruk would definitely be attacked. Enkidu's judgment came from following Wuming, while Gilgamesh's judgment was purely clairvoyant. Let's go, Enkidu. This king wants to see how those beasts attack this king's Uruk, Gilgamesh said, standing up with the help of the handrail and walking down the step. In response, Enkidu smiled helplessly. I told you to stay on the city wall, and now you want to go over. Idiot, how can this king stay on the front line all the time? Although Gilgamesh said so, as his only friend, Enkidu knew that Gilgamesh needed to rest after coming back. Gilgamesh just took a nap, and the reason why Enkidu took the initiative to speak was because he sensed that Gilgamesh was awake. As Gilgamesh's only friend, Enkidu could sense Gilgamesh's condition even through his aura. Okay, let's go. Enkidu, who also understood that Gilgamesh was at Sundara, stopped discussing this topic and followed Gilgamesh with Funbaba in his arms. Outside the southwest city wall of the Uruk, near Nabistan's Fong, 5 huge monsters were constantly destroying Nabistan's Fong, trying to let the sea of black mud flow through. Nabistan's Fong was not strong enough to withstand the attacks of these 5 monsters. Just the collision of their bodies was enough to destroy Nabistan's Fong. The sea of black mud began to move toward the Uruk, and some fragments of Nabistan's Fong that were scattered on the sea of black mud were picked up by one of the monsters. This was a huge bull with a pair of fierce horns. It was Kuthalik, one of the 11 sons of Tiamat. Obviously, even if Kuthalik transformed from his human form to his beast form, he was still the strongest among the 11 sons. No, it should be said that he was stronger in his beast form. He was holding a sharp fragment of Nabistan's Fong, and he suddenly threw his head toward the Uruk sky. Whoosh! The fragment rushed toward the Uruk at high speed like a bullet. When the fragment reached the highest point, it began to fall in an arc, and then directly entered the light film of the Uruk. It fell heavily in an open space, smashing a big hole. In the middle of the street not far away there was also a big hole, and in the hole was another fragment of Nabistan's Fong. Obviously, these 2 fragments had entered the Uruk through the same method. But fortunately, these 2 fragments happened to fall in an open space, or even on the street, so there were no casualties. As for the humans in the Uruk, under the guidance of the soldiers, they were constantly retreating toward the central tower. A beautiful woman wearing a veil was saying something loudly. Hurry up, everyone, we'll be safe once we enter the tower. This was Siduri, and she was also giving orders. The underground of the tower had space for thousands of people to temporarily take refuge. Although it was a little difficult to let everyone in the Uruk take refuge in it, The other rooms on the ground of the tower could also be used for refuge. As the central building of the Uruk, the tower was naturally strong. As long as they didn't hide on a floor that was too high, even if the fragment of Nabistin's Fong fell, it wouldn't cause any harm to the people hiding in it. At the thought that the people would soon be safe, Siduri couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. However, at this moment, a sound of something breaking through the air came from above Siduri's head. Siduri couldn't help but look up. It was another fragment of Nabistin's Fong, and the landing site was where she was. Chapter 10:19. However, before the fragment landed, a purple figure leaped towards the fragment. With a flash of a blade, the fragment turned into fragments and fell to the ground. "Are you all right?" Anna's figure landed in front of Siduri. Her scythe indicated that it was Anna who saved Siduri. "I'm fine, Miss Anna. Thank you so much." Siduri bowed to Anna to express her gratitude. "Let's leave quickly. The Uruk is in danger now." Anna blushed and turned her head away. She couldn't help but put on her hood. Yes, Miss Anna should be careful too. However, Siduri didn't retreat in the direction of the tower. Instead, she ran towards the crowd. She needed to guide the crowd. This was not only her duty as a witch chief, but also her duty as a human to help her fellow humans. Seeing that Siduri was covering some of the frightened crowd while leaving, Anna took off her hood. "That's why I hate humans the most." However, Anna's heart was the complete opposite of what she said. However, she didn't have time to sigh. A few more fragments fell from the sky. Anna jumped up again and prepared to use her undying slaughter blade. He parted to cut these fragments into pieces one by one. However, these were still fragments of Nabistin's Fong. It was difficult for Anna to cut them into pieces. However, if she didn't cut them into pieces, the fragments would destroy the surroundings and affect the people who hadn't retreated in time. Not good. Finally, something unexpected happened. A smaller fragment followed behind a larger one. Anna didn't notice it because she wasn't paying attention. Anna, who thought that she had cut the last fragment of Nabistin's Fong, was gradually falling to the ground. At this moment, a tiger's roar echoed through the sky. Roar! Kacha! Bang! Finally, the last piece of debris was completely shattered. Along with Anna, a yellow leopard fell to the ground. Although she made a tiger's roar, as expected, we still have to rely on the warriors of the forest. The great leopard man! Roar! Anna looked at the leopard man in disdain. She didn't say anything. After all, it was a fact that he helped her. Anna turned to look at the sky. It was definitely not a coincidence that the two fragments had overlapped. Anna was very sure of this. Then, there was only one explanation. The enemy's intelligence isn't lower than humans. As expected of Tiamat's magical beast, Gilgamesh said as he walked over with Enkidu, who was holding Funbaba. He and Enki both saw what happened just now, and he also saw that it was the doing of those 5 magic beasts. Because it's a pure physical attack, the light barrier didn't have any effect. It seems like the opponent is very clear about the defensive means of the light barrier. Gilgamesh couldn't help but frown. It wasn't scary that the enemy was strong. What was scary was that the enemy was strong and smart. At this moment, the 5 magical beasts outside were such enemies. The magical beasts this time are fundamentally different from the previous ones. Let's go. Follow this king to the city wall to take a look. As for the fragments falling from the sky, Gilgamesh had already activated a few divine power seals, Dinger, which were enough to destroy the fragments of Nabistin's Fong. Although the civilians and soldiers had entered the holy tower to take refuge, Gilgamesh could easily activate a few divine power seals, Dinger, by himself. He didn't need any soldiers. Plus, now that all the humans were gathered in the holy tower, even if 1 or 2 fragments fell, it wouldn't be a big deal. The only thing left was to take care of the 5 magical beasts that kept throwing fragments of Nabistin's Fong at the Uruk. Because the journey wasn't far, Gilgamesh and the others soon arrived at the city wall. The magical beasts probably realized that throwing fragments of Nabistin's Fang was no longer effective. Plus, they had basically used up all the fragments of Nabistin's Fang. Hence, the magical beasts completely gave up on the idea. However, more importantly, because of the damage to Nabistin's Fang, the sea of black mud had arrived in front of the Uruk. Although the light membrane protecting the Uruk was Wuming's noble artifact, the sea of black mud was created by Tiamat's authority. Even Gilgamesh doubted that the light membrane enveloping the Uruk could stop the sea of black mud. However, Gilgamesh believed that even if it couldn't stop it could still stop it for a while. As long as Wuming killed Tiamat in a while, everything would be fine. Sure enough, when the sea of black mud came into contact with the light membrane, the two seemed to have a chemical reaction. The light membrane sizzled and flashed like an alarm. Although the sea of black mud didn't enter the Uruk, it seemed that the light membrane wouldn't last long. However, at this moment, Gilgamesh and Enkidu suddenly sensed something and looked at somewhere in the sky in disbelief. There, a petite figure with a strong divinity suddenly appeared. Earth wave! Accompanied by a delicate but firm voice, the ground around the Uruk suddenly changed. The soil outside the Uruk became active like an ocean. It directly cut off the sea of black mud from the ground and formed a trapezoidal dam, blocking the sea of black mud outside. The sea of black mud that was cut off between the Uruk and the dam was transported by the soil and thrown back. This divinity. Gilgamesh showed an interesting expression. It's Lord Hyunryong's, Enkidu said. However, compared to Gilgamesh, Enkidu was more familiar with the person who used this power. The petite figure in the sky was Wuming's younger sister, Shitsuki Mayu. On Wuming's side, Wuming, who didn't know about Mayo's arrival, was contending with the 6 magic beasts while covering for Gadatsi and the others as they left. Looking in the direction in which Gadatsi and the others left, Wuming could no longer see them. Only then did he look at the 6 magic beasts seriously. The magic beasts left behind to deal with Wuming were not simple. Kitabliru Kururu, Dabrutu Basumuujj and Ramu. The first 5 magic beasts were among the strongest among the 11 magic beasts. However, Ramu caught Wuming's attention more. Apart from other reasons, the existence that was like a strengthened version of Ramu was like the center of the magic beast. How could Wuming not pay attention to it? Moreover, when Gadatsi and the others left, Ramu just waved its hand lightly. Hundreds of winged Ramu flew out from the sea of black mud below and flew in the direction that Gadatsi and the others left. This guy actually had magic beasts that could fly. How could Wuming not be shocked? Chapter 10:20. It seemed that even if Wuming stayed behind, the other party still wouldn't allow anyone to get close to Tiamat. But fortunately, it was only some winged Ramu that dealt with Gadatsi and the others, and not the 11 magical beasts. Although those mass-produced Ramu weren't weak, they were still too weak compared to the 11 magical beasts, so Wuming believed that Gadatsi and the others would be fine. There were 2 reasons why Wuming let Gadatsi and the others deal with Tiamat. First of all, Gadatsi and the others definitely wouldn't be able to kill Tiamat, and Wuming instructed Ishtar to attack from a distance only to give Gadatsi and the others a way out. After all, it would be easier for them to escape by pulling the distance. And why did Wuming let Gadatsi and the others go even though he knew that they couldn't kill Tiamat? The second reason was that Wuming wanted to take advantage of this time to kill these 6 magical beasts. So no matter what, Wuming had to speed up during the time when Gadatsi and the others were away and try to kill these 6 magical beasts as quickly as possible. After all, it was impossible for them to defeat the magical beasts, and even the survival of Gadatsi and the others was a problem. So these 6 magical beasts must all be eliminated by Wuming. Even if they couldn't kill all of them, they had to leave a number that Gadatsi and the others could deal with before turning to deal with Tiamat. And next, Wu-Ming had to use the power of God to deal with this group of children of the Creator. And the first to bear the brunt was Ramu. Fear the one with wings. Evil people and powerful people, all fear me with wings. My wings will bring you curses. Evil people can't hit me. As the words were chanted, Wu-Ming's figure suddenly disappeared. However, in the next second, Wu-Ming's figure appeared in front of Ramu, who was standing among the other magical beasts. And Wu-Ming had already stretched out his right hand and grabbed Ramu's head. The speed brought by the Phoenix incarnation wasn't something that magical beasts could react to. After all, the Phoenix incarnation was related to time, so how could it let the other party react? In an instant, Wu-Ming came into contact with seraphic speed and chanted another word. I am the strongest, and I hold all the victory in my hands. No matter if it's a human or a demon, I will defeat any enemy who is in my way. Poochie! Like crushing a watermelon, Lachmu's head, which Wu-Ming was grabbing, was crushed by Wu-Ming's arm, which was filled with the power of a giant. Purple blood splattered everywhere, but not a single drop landed on Wu-Ming's body. Wu-Ming had already set up a telekinesis wall in front of him. Roar! Roar! Roar, roar, roar! Roar, roar! Ramu's sudden death scared the other magical beasts. In their senses, Wu-Ming disappeared in an instant, Ramu's head exploded, and Wu-Ming appeared among the 5 magical beasts. Giant with unparalleled divine power, please help me. With the words, a giant golden arm attached to Wu-Ming's left hand. Then Wu-Ming suddenly turned around and waved the giant golden arm around, and the 5 magical beasts were suddenly thrown out. Looking at the 5 magical beasts standing on the sea of black mud and surrounding Wu-Ming, Wu-Ming turned off the giant incarnation, and the golden arm on his left hand disappeared. Thou hast violated the contract and brought evil to the world. Lord's Day, sinners will be punished. Then, holding Ramu's headless body, Wu-Ming began to chant again. Crush its back, dig out its tendons, bones, hair, and brain, and trample on its blood and mud. If I am the one who cannot get close to the darkness, I will follow the words of the Lord and destroy thee. Suddenly, something like a black hole appeared on Ramu's headless body. In an instant, the body was sucked into the black hole and disappeared. Then, as if quite tired, Wu-Ming shook his right hand. It must be said that Ramu's body was as tough as its appearance. It was far from being comparable to the mass-produced Ramu. Although Wu-Ming easily crushed Ramu's head, it consumed a lot of Wu-Ming's energy. Wu-Ming's arm was also tired, otherwise, Wu-Ming would not have changed his arm to attack the other 5 magical beasts. Wu-Ming did not underestimate the 11 magical beasts. On the contrary, they were very important. After all, they came out of the sea of black mud. Using the Phoenix incarnation that had never been used in front of magical beasts to get close to Ramu and catch it by surprise. Then, using the giant incarnation, coupled with a trace of the power of the source of the black mud, he successfully crushed Ramu's head. Finally, he used the annihilation incarnation to destroy Ramu's headless body. After all, a magical beast's vitality was very strong. However, Wu-Ming could not guarantee that Ramu did not have any special abilities. Wu-Ming was afraid that the headless Ramu could come back to life. These were enough to see Wu-Ming's importance to Ramu, and Ramu died without playing any role. No, thinking about it carefully, it was still useful. The other 5 magical beasts knew about Wu-Ming's methods. If Wu-Ming wanted to use this method to kill other magical beasts, it would most likely not work. However, even so, it was worth it to kill Ramu, who gave Wu-Ming a sense of importance. Rubbing his right wrist, Wu-Ming looked at Baxiomu. Baxiomu was his next target. After all, Wu-Ming had 12 incarnations. When Wu-Ming killed a magical beast, Godatsi's side did not have any accidents as Wu-Ming expected. Although the mass-produced Ramu was powerful, and the mass-produced Ramu with wings was even more powerful, they were still not as good as the 11 magical beasts. Probably because Quizzard and Ishtar couldn't beat the 11 magical beasts, The two of them worked extra hard to deal with these mass-produced Ramu. Or it could be said that they were venting. Die, 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 die. Ishtar frantically attacked the mass-produced Ramu with anima. With a face full of resentment, she kept muttering this sentence. Although she couldn't hit Ramu every time, as long as she hit Ramu, the opponent would be killed. This was enough to prove that Ishtar put a lot of magic into each attack, and Quizzard used the mass-produced Ramu as a stepping stone, constantly moving between the Ramu. And every time Quizzard moved, a Ramu would fall. These Ramu were directly killed by Quizzard's fatal wrestling skills. Two goddesses, so scary. Gudatsi and Matthew looked at Ishtar and Quizzard with some fear and gulped. Nawakamaru and Musasobo Benkei quietly stayed on the pterosaur's back. Because the two goddesses were venting, although they didn't have a chance to attack, they had some free time. Ahahaha, almost all the enemies have been wiped out. Merlin laughed. Sure enough, after Merlin finished speaking, Gudatsi found that there was only one Ramu left, and it seemed to be dumbfounded, flying there motionlessly. But it didn't matter. Anyway, this Ramu had to face the two goddesses venting. When it finally reacted, it couldn't help but shudder. Then, a golden light flashed, and it fell into darkness. Chapter 10:21. The last Ramu died after being attacked by the two goddesses. Ishtar, who couldn't find a target, stopped shooting, and Quizzard, who also couldn't find a target, returned to the back of her pterosaur. At this moment, everyone flew side by side. I'm in a good mood, that's right, the two goddesses smiled like goddesses. Gudatsi and Matthew couldn't connect the two goddesses at this moment with the previous two. Gudatsi simply changed the topic. I don't know how Assassin is doing. While talking, Gudatsi showed a trace of worry. After all, the 6 magical beasts were difficult to deal with for Ishtar and Quizzard, so it was natural for Gudatsi to be worried. Senpai, I believe that Senpai Villo will be fine. After all, he has always been very reliable. Matthew clenched his small fist and nodded to Gudatsi. In this regard, Ishtar also agreed. Matthew is right. That guy won't do anything that he isn't sure of. Since he chose to deal with the 6 magical beasts, he must have his reasons. Since Ishtar said so, I think Hyunryong will be fine. But I didn't expect you to have so much confidence in Hyunryong, then, Quizzard also interjected, but her tone was quite mocking. I don't have confidence in him. But, if Hyunryong can be defeated so easily, I won't be unable to defeat him for so long in the past. Ishtar crossed her arms and looked proud. Everyone, now is not the time to quarrel. Nawakamaru said something, but her face was a little ugly. Similarly, Musasobo Benkei, who was still silent, also looked a little ugly. We probably have a problem. At this time, Merlin, who was on the back of the pterosaur next to Gudatsi, suddenly pointed to the front. His expression was a little ugly. There was no other reason than the place Merlin had pointed to. Gudatsi and others looked at the place where Merlin pointed. It was dark. The clouds in the sky gradually turned into dark clouds, and the sky gradually turned scarlet. Under the alternating black and red sky, the Indian Ocean connected to the Persian Gulf was dark. No, it wasn't the Indian Ocean, it was the black mud. The black mud connected the sky and the sea, not metaphorically, but a real connection. In front of everyone, from the surface of the sea to the black clouds in the sky, it was as if a wall of black mud had formed. All they could see was black mud and nothing else. In a sense, the water and the sky was black. Because the surrounding environment had been turning dark, and Gudatsi and others' attention was attracted by Ishtar and Quizzard, they didn't notice this scene. The black mud that formed the water and the sky was faintly creeping. Anyway, in Gudatsi's opinion, it was quite disgusting. She now understood why Merlin frowned. After discovering this situation, Quizzard had already stopped the pterosaurs and even faintly retreated. Then, Roman's panicked voice came from Gudatsi's bracelet. Quizzard, retreat quickly? At that moment, Quizzard didn't care whether Roman's words were correct or not. She immediately waved her hand, and the pterosaurs made a sharp turn and flew backward. Gudazzi, who didn't react for a moment, even fell on Matthew due to inertia. Sitting up again, Gudazzi looked at her bracelet in confusion. "Doctor, what's wrong?" "That's right, they only saw the black mud that was the same color as the sky, and there was still some distance between them. Why were they in such a hurry to leave? It was as if the danger was already near them." "I don't know what you saw. Chaldea can't receive the image, since you went deep into the Indian Ocean, but fortunately, the instrument is still working as usual." Roman, who was in Chaldea, wiped the sweat on his forehead that appeared out of nowhere and answered Gudazzi word by word. "The instrument detected that there was a huge amount of magic everywhere around you just now. No, to be precise, you are in a space full of huge magic, and your surroundings are still like this. To make an analogy, you can imagine that you are in the Holy Grail." Although the tone was also very serious, even at a critical moment, Leonardo da Vinci still didn't forget to joke. Roman and Leonardo da Vinci's words made everyone recover from the shock, and then they were shocked again. What they realized was that the magic that was being emitted was probably the black mud around them. And the shock was easier to understand. "Look carefully, the distance around us seems to be dark." Ishtar frowned. The pterosaur had been flying behind them, but they didn't seem to have moved at all. "If that's the case..." Gudazzi's eyes widened. In the end, Quizzard said a guess that was likely to be the truth. "Maybe we have entered a special space like what Leonardo da Vinci said." They were shocked because they seemed to be trapped on the coast of the Persian Gulf. Wuming, holding the holy sword, stood on a huge red-haired monster that looked like a wolf or a dog burning with holy flames. The reddish-yellow flames and the color of the monster reflected on Wuming, who was standing on top, and looked particularly sacred. After confirming that the body under him was cold, Wuming raised his hand and waved. The sword of salvation released a ray of light and shone on the body. In an instant, the flame transformed by the sun suddenly burned. He was going to use the flame to burn the body of the demonic beast. Every time Wuming killed a demonic beast, he would use various means to destroy the body to prevent them from suddenly resurrecting. Then, Wuming could not help but look at the direction where Gudazzi and the others left. It has been so long, why hasn't Ishtar activated her noble phantasm? There was still a connection between Ishtar and Wuming. Once Ishtar activated her noble phantasm, Wuming could easily feel it. Wuming, who felt that something was not right, was a little uneasy. "It seems that there is no time to deal with the remaining 2 demonic beasts." That's right, Wuming did not kill the 6 demonic beasts. After Wuming killed Ramu, he successively killed Baxiomu, Umdabrutu, and Ulidim. Only Musamafu and Kururu were left. Kururu could fly, which meant that it was more agile than Baxiomu and the rest. Musamafu, on the other hand, was cunning and cherished his life. After Wu Ming killed Basumu, he hid in the sea of black mud. Even if he attacked Wu Ming, he would only feign an attack as a cover. After that, he would immediately dive into the depths of the sea of black mud, allowing Omudabirutu, Ulidim, and Kurulu to take charge of the main attacks. After killing Umdabrutu, the remaining 2 demonic beasts, Kururu and Ulidim, panicked. The body under Wuming that was about to burn out was Ulidim's. Chapter 10:22. Wuming took advantage of the moment when Ulidim and Kururu were in a panic and captured Ulidim in one fell swoop. After fighting for a while, he directly used the Sun incarnation as his trump card to kill Ulidim. But unfortunately, Kururu also took the opportunity to sneak into the sea of black mud, and Musamafu no longer appeared after Wuming killed Umdablutu. It was estimated that Musamafu had sneaked into a deeper place. At this moment, the sea of black mud still had some influence on Wuming, so Wuming couldn't go deep into the sea of black mud to find Musamafu and Kururu. In addition, Wuming noticed that something was wrong with Gudazzi, so he decided to let the two monsters go for the time being. He was going to see what happened to Gadotsi and Kururu first. However, at this moment, something unexpected happened to Wuming. The black-purple portal that was under his control suddenly opened automatically beside him. This made Wuming shocked and puzzled. Wuming learned this move from the game system when he transmigrated to another world. In other words, the portal was a unique move. Wuming also taught Demetrius the move system of Yggdrasil, but because Demetrius was a servant, Wuming couldn't be sure whether Demetrius had mastered the magic system of Yggdrasil. However, even if Demetrius had mastered it, she also promised Wuming that she wouldn't spread it out. So who opened the portal that appeared in front of Wuming? In the next second, Wuming got the answer. "Brother Wuming?" A delicate and excited voice came out from the portal, and then, a black-haired, white-robed figure rushed into Wuming's arms from the portal. Wuming instantly understood who came and hugged the person in his arms and rubbed her little head. The person who came was naturally Wuming's cute sister, Shutsuki Mayu. "Mayu? Why are you here?" Wuming was both puzzled and shocked. This was a singularity, and it was Mesopotamia in BC. Mayu couldn't have come here. As for whether it was true or not, when Mayu shouted, "Brother Wuming," Wuming knew that the Mayu in his arms was not someone else. "It was Brother Wuming's power that brought me here." Mayu's cheeks were slightly red because of Wuming's touch, but she still enjoyed it like a kitten. When Mayu said this, Wuming suddenly realized that he did give his power to Mayu. After Wuming got rid of Darius, the world of Mayu and Ilya was safe. After that, Wuming left that world and used the black mud to find Gydia. When he left, Wuming asked the young Gilgamesh to give Mayu the rank card with his power. It was a golden caster magician rank card. Although the crisis in Wuming's world had been solved by Wuming, and Mayu would not have any trouble, Wuming still left his power to Mayu just in case. After that, because of a series of involuntary things, Wuming was a little busy. During this time, he did not go back to see Mayu. Wuming also gradually forgot that he gave Mayu the rank card. My rank card suddenly became hot, and then I felt the summoning from the rank card. I thought it was Brother Wuming calling me, so I responded to the summoning. As a result, I appeared next to the blonde Rin and Osaka. God knows what Mayu's expression was when she saw the blonde Rin and Osaka with Wuming's aura. Anyway, Mayu only remembered that she was completely dumbfounded at the time. When Mayu said this, Wuming understood everything. It was probably because Ereshkigal created a chain of summoning when she merged with Wuming's divinity. She inadvertently contacted Mayu, who held Wuming's rank card, and Mayu thought it was Wuming calling her. As a result, she came over in a daze. At this moment, Mayu was a servant's body composed of a rank card and a spirit core, which was somewhat similar to Little Black. Little Black had already installed a magic converter in her body, and now she didn't need to rely on others to replenish her mana. But after all, she still had the body of a servant, unlike the body of an ordinary primary school student like Ilya and Mayu. In the past, Wuming didn't have any means. Now, Wuming could use the power of the source to create a puppet body for Little Black that was 100% similar to the body of a primary school student. Mayu's human body should still be in her world. Even if something happened to Mayu in Wuming's arms, it wouldn't affect Mayu's body. At most, it would cause the rank card to be scrapped. However, Wuming wouldn't let anything happen to Mayu. And the other party isn't Rin and Osaka. She just borrowed Rin and Osaka's appearance. Remember to call her Sister L. Wuming knocked Mayu's little head. I know, Brother Wuming. Don't knock my head all the time. Wuming didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He rubbed Mayu's little head again, comforting Mayu's depression of being knocked on the head. You said you appeared next to Ereshkigal. How is Ereshkigal now? Wuming was quite worried about Ereshkigal. Blonde-haired Rin and Osaka. I mean, Sister L is now dealing with the demonic beasts in Uruk. She asked me to come and find Brother Wuming to see if there's anything I can help with. However, Wuming had a strange expression. Are you sure Ereshkigal didn't ask you to come and find me to save the day? Wuming almost said this sentence. Can Ereshkigal defeat those 5 demonic beasts? Although Wuming asked cautiously, there was still distrust in his words. It couldn't be helped. Quizzard and Ishtar would have a problem surviving against any one of the demonic beasts. How could Ereshkigal defeat 5 demonic beasts? Mayu pouted and was a little dissatisfied. Brother Wuming, don't underestimate Sister L. She directly locked the 5 demonic beasts in the underworld. Immediately, Mayu described the whole process of the 5 demonic beasts attacking the Uruk. When the sea of black mud rushed to the Uruk, Mayu cast the servant in the class card, which was Wuming's ability, Yggdrasil Systems Magic. She raised the ground and intercepted the sea of black mud. After that, Ereshkigal, who received Wuming's divinity, got rid of the restrictions of the underworld and came to the ground. However, Ereshkigal still had a trace of her own divinity, so the underworld still protected Ereshkigal. She successfully launched her underworld authority and locked the 5 demonic beasts in her own underworld. In the underworld, Ereshkigal could be said to be invincible. The 5 demonic beasts were lambs waiting to be slaughtered. However, Wuming was not optimistic about Ereshkigal. After all, these demonic beasts emerged from the sea of black mud, and the essence of the sea of black mud was the black mud, which was the same as Wuming's. Since the 5 demonic beasts were likely not to be suppressed by the underworld, Ereshkigal was in danger. Chapter 10:23. Wuming waved his hand, and a clay tablet unique to Uruk appeared in his hand. The clay tablet was covered with Lune runes, and these runes stored the words that Wuming wanted to say. Mayu, immediately bring this to Gilgamesh, and then look for Ereshkigal. Those demonic beasts are not ordinary demonic beasts, and I'm worried that she might have an accident. After Wuming finished speaking, he handed the clay tablet to Mayu. I understand, Brother Wuming. Mayu nodded with a serious expression. Mayu, who had Wuming's class card, was equivalent to Wuming in the state of caster, magician. Her magic power was almost infinite, and she had mastered Lune magic and Yggdrasil magic. She also had a huge amount of divinity and a dragon's breath, and some of Wuming's noble artifacts. Not to mention fighting against enemies, she had no problem protecting herself. In addition, Mayu was a serious and strict child, so Wuming was very relieved to let Mayu handle this matter. What is Brother Wuming going to do? Mayu asked abruptly, and she seemed a little nervous. Knowing that Mayu was worried about his Wuming, Wuming could not help but smile, and then he put his hand on Mayu's head. Don't worry, I'm just going to solve a small problem. After this matter is over, don't be in a hurry to go back. Stay in Uruk, and I'll make omelette rice for you alone. That's right, Wuming was going to give Mayu special treatment. Although Mayu was a little embarrassed to leave Ilya and Little Black to eat alone, when she thought that she could have Wuming to herself, Mayu was secretly delighted. Well, I'm waiting for Brother Wuming to make omelette rice for me in Uruk. After saying that with a blush on her cheeks, Mayu opened the portal and went in. In this regard, Wuming showed a warm expression. Sure enough, Mayu has always been very sensible. It was not the matter of making omelette rice for Mayu. Wuming's sensible was that Mayu did not ask much. Anyone could tell that the situation was not good just by looking around. Although it was not a certain death, the dark doomsday scene of the sky and sea was still very unsettling. However, Mayu did not ask anything. She did not ask what was going on here, nor did she ask why Wuming said anything. She only listened to her brother's words, listened to Wuming's words, and did what Wuming told her to do. She was completely like an obedient sister who listened to her brother's words. Or perhaps this was Mayu's mature side. If it were Little Black, he might not be as good as Mayu. If it were Ilya, it would definitely be worse. Ilya would most likely get to the bottom of it. If she did not do that, Ilya would definitely be distracted or absent-minded. As if imagining Ilya's embarrassed look, Wuming could not help but smile. For the sake of Beauty Tour, for the sake of Ilya and Blackie who aren't here, I have to work harder. After Wuming finished speaking, he landed on the black mud sea and sat on the surface of the sea. First of all, I need to confirm whether Gadotsi and the others are safe. As Wuming said, he raised his arm and turned the back of his hand to himself. Some red marks were clearly visible on the back of Wuming's hand, which was the magic power crystal of Ishtar's command spell that had been used up before. Although it was said to be a command spell, it did not have most of the effects of a command spell. It only had the effect of replenishing the magic power of the servant. Moreover, after these command spells were used up, they could be replenished through the magic power in the body, but they had not been used, so Wuming did not replenish them. And now it was the time to use them. Wuming's raised hand suddenly clenched into a fist. The originally sparse red marks on the back of his hand suddenly solidified, forming 3 scarlet command seals that resembled a bow and arrow, yet also resembled a pair of wings. Wuming replenished his magic power. After that, Wuming began to issue orders to Ishtar. By the command curse, O goddess of fertility and war, restore your magic power to full. By command spell, mistress of heaven, restore your magic power. By the command of the curse, Ishtar, release your noble phantoms and break through the predicament. That's right, Wuming used all the command spells in one breath. Although there were 3 command spells, their function was only to replenish Ishtar's magic power. The first command was to replenish Ishtar's magic power. The second command was to make Ishtar's body overflow with magic power. The third command was to make Ishtar's magic power so much that it was completely out of control, to the extent that it would cause a big explosion if left alone. In this way, the effect of Ishtar's noble phantoms would be several times the original, or even more than 10 times. After all, this was not a game. Doubling was not just multiplying by 2, and multiplying by several times was not just multiplying by several. In this way, Wuming believed that Ishtar's noble phantoms would be able to affect the surrounding environment. With this, Wuming would be able to find them. Sure enough, a few seconds after Wuming gave the 3 orders, a light that resembled a falling star appeared in a certain direction. Then, there was a big explosion. On Gadotsi's side, after the big explosion caused by Ishtar's noble phantoms, Matthew put away his noble phantoms, revealing a few pterosaurs and a few people on their backs. Just now, everyone was still thinking of a way to get out, but Ishtar suddenly panicked and shouted for Hyunryong. Then, she released her noble phantoms that seemed to be many times stronger. After Ishtar's attack was released from Anna's horse, Matthew also activated his noble phantoms and successfully blocked in front of everyone, blocking the aftershock. TSK, TSK, TSK. Ishtar is indeed powerful. She can release such a powerful attack. Merlin sighed as he watched from the side. He did not care about what Ishtar, who was lying on Gadotsi's pterosaur, was thinking. Damn it! Hyunryong. Ishtar wanted to look ferocious, but she was too tired to do so. She even stuttered when she spoke. Ms. Ishtar, are you all right? Matthew looked at Ishtar with concern. However, Gadotsi interrupted. Matthew, you blocked the big explosion just now. Are you hurt? Matthew shook his head. I'm fine, Senior. Ms. Ishtar's noble phantoms were launched far away. I only blocked the aftershock. But just the aftershock alone scared me. Quizzard was the one who spoke now. I didn't expect Ishtar to release such a powerful attack. If there were levels, Ishtar's attack could be categorized as EX. It's all virtuous. Dragon. That guy. Ugh. Ishtar tilted her head and stopped talking. She was so tired that she couldn't take it anymore. Ishtar's body almost exploded after 3 times of mana replenishment. If Ishtar did not release her noble phantoms quickly, Gadotsi and the rest would have been dead by now. Even after releasing her noble phantoms, Ishtar did not feel good. She was still weak. Therefore, it was not unreasonable for Ishtar to gnash his teeth at Wuming. Chapter 10:24. His Excellency Hyunryong must be looking for us, Musasobo Benkei said. It could only be said that Wu Ming was worthy of the existence of the new army. Not only did Wu Ming understand, but Nyo Ruoan also understood Wu Ming's intention early on. His Excellency Hyunryong is right. If not, we wouldn't have found the exit. Following Nawakamaru's gaze, a gap appeared in front of them. Unlike the other places, light shone through the gap. They were indeed trapped, but Ishtar's noble phantasm forcefully blasted a hole in the black mud. Not only did Wuming get them out of danger, but he could also tell Wuming where they were. It was killing two birds with one stone. Even Ishtar could only keep her dissatisfaction to herself. It was precisely because Wuming's action was correct that Ishtar, who did not have the moral high ground, could not find trouble with Wuming afterwards. Although she was the mistress of the sky, Ishtar, who had suffered a lot in the hands of Wuming, understood one thing. If she were to find trouble with Wuming, she could still save some face. However, if she were to find trouble with Wuming, she would definitely be tricked by Wuming, just like when she was in the underworld. Let's hurry up and leave, Gudatsi suggested. If there were any accidents later, they would be in trouble. However, that was how trouble would come about. Suddenly, the entire space began to shake. Whether it was the sky, the sea, or even the walls that connected the sky and the sea, everything shook and a black substance began to fall. The sharp-eyed Quizzard was able to immediately tell that the black substance was black mud. Quizzard immediately ordered the pterosaurs. Quick, pterosaurs, head there at full speed. A few pterosaurs flew in the direction of the gap. They were so fast that Gudatsi had to hold on tightly to their back. However, the black mud was falling faster and faster. Gradually, the entire space looked like it was raining black mud. The raindrops were the size of a fist. Fortunately, the gap between the raindrops was large and it was not a rainstorm yet. Therefore, they could continue to fly over on the pterosaurs. However, because the pterosaur was jumping up and down and swaying left and right to avoid the rain of black mud, Gudatsi almost couldn't catch it. Fortunately, Mashu was there to help Gudatsi. She didn't let Gudatsi fall down, nor did she let Gudatsi touch the black mud. However, everyone could see that the raindrops were getting bigger and denser. At this moment, the pterosaurs were still halfway to the exit. Although everyone knew that they could not touch the black mud, Quizzard could not help but say, "Everyone, don't get touched by the black mud." However, now that the volume and frequency of the raindrops had increased, it was too difficult to not get stained by the black mud. The first accident happened. Gah! The pterosaur that Nawakamaru and Musasobo Benkei were riding on was dripped by a drop of the black mud, and let out a scream. Then, the entire pterosaur flew around uncontrollably and even collided with several drops of rain. Lady Nawakamaru? Don't worry about me, Michin. Nawakamaru and Musasobo Benkei's panicked voices came from the pterosaur. Lady Nawakamaru? Mr. Michin? Matthew shouted nervously. Whoosh! Suddenly, countless petals flew to Nawakamaru and Musasobo Benkei's pterosaur. It was as if the pterosaur was frozen in place and became quiet. The rain that fell from the sky seemed to have encountered some resistance and was blocked by the petals. In the next second, Merlin flew over on the pterosaur while Musasobo Benkei and Nawakamaru took the opportunity to jump onto Merlin's pterosaur. Piedra del Sol. The Quetzalcoatl god had released the real phantasm of the Piedra Almanac that was originally in the Temple of Eridu. Although Eric Metropolis was drowned by the sea of black mud, the Piedra god had summoned the Piedra Almanac to her side before Eric Metropolis was drowned. As for the size, it was Quizzard's phantasm and could be changed at will. Flames and lava emerged from a fiery red stone in Quizzard's hand and formed a semicircular protective shield. Quizzard raised it above her head. "Everyone, come to my side." The protective shield of flames and lava blocked the rain above Quizzard's head and was wide enough to protect the others. The pterosaur that Gudotsi and the others were riding on immediately flew over. Everyone immediately flew toward the gap without stopping. After all, it was better to leave as soon as possible. The pterosaur that was stained by the rain fell into the darkness below as if it had died. After they were safe, Musasobo Benkei took the lead to ask about Nawakamaru's safety. "Lady Nawakamaru, are you okay?" Nawakamaru half knelt on the pterosaur's back and shook his head to show that he was fine. "Di-Ching, no, Ocean Lord, it's all thanks to you this time." Nawakamaru knew that she was almost stained by the black mud. Although it was just a little bit of black mud, who knew how the black mud eroded? Was it instant assimilation? Or did it need time? No one knew, and no one would try. "What are you talking about, Nawakamaru? As long as you're okay." Musasobo Benkei, who was half kneeling on the pterosaur's back, lowered his head silently as if he was dead. This gave Nawakamaru a shock. Similarly, Gudotsi and Matthew, who were on the pterosaur's back, were also shocked. "Mr. Di-Ching? Di-Ching?" Quizzard, who was using her noble artifact, and Ishtar, who was exhausted, did not have time to care. However, Merlin, who was riding on the same pterosaur as Musasobo Benkei and Nawakamaru, seemed to have noticed something and squinted his eyes. However, Musasobo Benkei lowered his head and spoke. "Lady Nawakamaru, I have something to ask of you." Hearing Musasobo Benkei's voice, Nawakamaru was relieved. "What's the matter?" As long as he was not dead, everything was fine. "Can I ask you to die?" After Musasobo Benkei finished speaking, he instantly got up and slashed at Nawakamaru with his Bicento. "What?" Gudotsi and Matthew widened their eyes when they saw this scene. They could not react at all. Not only them, but even Nawakamaru could not react. After all, Nawakamaru did not expect Musasobo Benkei to assassinate him. This was not a dereliction of duty as a general on the battlefield. Instead, it was natural for him to lower his guard around someone close to him. However, the attack was still blocked. Clank! The holy sword that looked like an authentic item blocked the sharp she blade, making a piercing sound. The one who blocked the attack was naturally Merlin, who was next to Nawakamaru. He had just noticed that something was wrong with Musasobo Benkei. "Sure enough, you have been assimilated by the black mud." Chapter 10:25. Following Merlin's words, everyone looked at Musasobo Benkei, who was holding his Bicento and preparing to slash. Musasobo Benkei's skin was originally the color of a dead person, and his thick eyelids were not something a normal person could have. But at this moment, Musasobo Benkei did not look like a normal person. Black lines could be vaguely seen on Musasobo Benkei's skin like tattoos, and a chaotic aura filled Musasobo Benkei's body. And at the back of Musasobo Benkei's neck, there was an obvious black mark. It was the mark of the black mud after it dried up. There was no doubt that he had been stained by the black mud when the pterosaur lost control. "I didn't expect the black mud to be able to assimilate instantly." Merlin frowned, then used his sword to lift Musasobo Benkei's Bicento, then stabbed at Musasobo Benkei. However, Musasobo Benkei jumped off the pterosaur's back and stood on something black, bathing in the rain of black mud. It was a pterosaur, a black pterosaur. It was the pterosaur that had fallen below and was eroded by the black mud. "This is really surprising. I didn't expect Sir Merlin's swordsmanship to be so outstanding." Merlin's move was not easy to block, so Musasobo Benkei chose to retreat. "Senior, please be careful." Matthew, who reacted at this moment, immediately held his shield in front of Gudotsi and Ishtar, and looked warily at Musasobo Benkei, who was standing on the black pterosaur. Quizzard knew what had happened, but she did not move and maintained her lava shield. However, the pterosaurs collectively sped up again. They had to leave the range of the rain of black mud first, or they would be in an extremely disadvantageous situation no matter what they did. Musasobo Benkei went from the pterosaur lost control due to the black mud to assassinating Nawakamaru in less than 10 seconds. There was no doubt that he had been assimilated by the black mud or Tiamat's authority in these 10 seconds or even shorter. To be honest, this assimilation speed scared Quizzard. How could there be such an exaggerated ability in this world? Quizzard did not know that Tiamat's ability was most likely strengthened by the black mud, so she could only be amazed. He wasn't sure if the assimilation speed had anything to do with one's strength, but he was afraid that he would be done for once he was infected. Therefore, he had to leave the range of the rain of black mud. However, the black pterosaur, at the same speed, at the same time, the pterosaur was not far behind Nawakamaru's. At this moment, Nyoruoan spoke. When Nawakamaru's state of mind was unusually good. She did not break down because of Musasobo Benkei's assimilation. Instead, she talked to him very calmly. Merlin silently took a few steps back, leaving space for Musasobo Benkei and Nawakamaru to talk. The moment I asked you about your situation, I felt the existence of Mother. That is the supreme truth, the true Buddhist kingdom that saves all living beings from suffering? When he said this, Musasobo Benkei was clearly a little excited. No, it should be crazy. Lord Nawakamaru, I want you to return to Mother's embrace with them, and you should be in front of them. Unfortunately, you were stopped by Sir Merlin. As if he had really missed something important, Musasobo Benkei shook his head regretfully. Stay here and let this penniless monk send you to see Mother. With that, Musasobo Benkei raised his hand and grasped at the gap. Countless black mud filled the gap. The gap began to heal quickly. At this moment, Musasobo Benkei could actually control the black mud? This gave everyone a fright. It was not easy to open a gap in this black mud space. Once it closed, who knew how to get out? It was hard to say whether Wuming could find them again. Everyone, come to my side. Quizzard called out to the crowd. Merlin was the first to jump onto Quizzard's pterosaur. Then, Nawakamaru jumped onto Gadatsi and came to Quizzard's side with Matthew, who was carrying Ishtar. Feathered serpent god pterosaur, full speed ahead. Quizzard's pterosaur that everyone was riding suddenly accelerated and tried to speed out with the other pterosaurs that were following closely behind. However, Musasobo Benkei smiled slightly. You can't get out. I'll wait for you here. Indeed, as Musasobo Benkei said, when everyone was still a short distance away from the gap was almost closed. However, just when everyone was helpless, a black-purple ripple suddenly appeared in front of the pterosaurs that were flying at high speed. The pterosaurs, Gadatsi, and the others plunged into it and the portal immediately closed. Seeing this scene, Musasobo Benkei could not help but frown. His Excellency Hyunryong? At this point, the gap was completely closed without a single gap. A second ago, in the world outside the gap, Wuming floated in the air and opened the portal. In an instant, a few pterosaurs that were not small flew out. Then, Wuming instantly closed the portal. I've finally found you. Wuming looked at Gadatsi and the others who were on the pterosaur's back. Assassin, you're finally here. Gadatsi's face lit up with joy. I arrived just in time. If I was any later, I wouldn't have been able to save you. When Wuming arrived, he happened to see Gadatsi and the others flying toward him in the darkness. He saw that there was a gap that was rapidly closing, so Wuming directly opened a portal on the path that the pterosaurs had to pass through. That was how he managed to save Gadatsi and the others. I understand the situation now. You guys can return to Uruk first. Leave the rest to me. When Wuming saw Musasobo Benkei standing on the back of a black pterosaur, He guessed that he was probably assimilated by the black mud. However, just when Gadotsi and Matthew wanted to say something, Merlin suddenly became serious. "Are you ready?" "I'm ready." This was Wuming's answer, and he was quite certain. "Then I'll leave it to you." In this regard, Wuming did not say anything and only nodded. Gadotsi and Matthew also shut their mouths and did not speak again. "I won't leave. I want to stay," Nawakamaru suddenly interrupted rather calmly. Without a doubt, she chose to stay because of Musasobo Benkei. "You might die," Wuming answered her simply. "I'm sorry, Your Excellency Hyunryong. I've made up my mind." Wuming nodded. Since her attitude had already reached this point, he did not need to persuade her anymore. Ms. Nawakamaru, Nyoru, Gadotsi and Matthew did not know what to say and looked worried. On the contrary, Nawakamaru was quite optimistic. "Your Excellency Fujimaru, Your Excellency Matthew, take care." The three of them looked at each other and nodded. After that, Quizzard spoke again. "This is for you." She stretched out her hand, and there was a fiery red stone in her hand that seemed to be burning. This was the noble phantasm that Quizzard had just cast, the solar ephemeris, Piedra del Sol. This noble phantasm is activated by the solar ephemeris. It can be said that it's a one-time use noble phantasm. After it's activated, it won't be deactivated, so I want to give it to you to use up. I should have used this trick earlier. Then, your subordinates wouldn't have been in trouble. Quizzard said as if she was blaming herself. In this regard, Nawakamaru shook his head. "It's not your fault, Your Excellency Quizzard." The rain of black mud was getting more and more difficult to dodge, so it was not an accident that it was hit. Moreover, this was a one-time use noble phantasm, so it must be kept for critical occasions. What's more, Quizzard immediately used this noble phantasm when there was an accident just now. It was obvious that she was not someone who did not know the severity of the situation. At this moment, Quizzard wanted to give this activated noble phantasm to Nawakamaru and let Nawakamaru use it up. "I'll take it." After that, Nawakamaru's hand held the solar ephemeris. Chapter 10:26. Wuming opened the portal to Uruk and let Gadotsi and the others go back. Before they left, Ishtar, who had recovered a bit of strength, complained to Wuming, as if Wuming had done something to her. After closing the portal quickly, Wuming looked at Nawakamaru, who was not present. At this moment, Nawakamaru's right hand was clenched into a fist, and smoke was coming out of it. That was the sign that the solar ephemeris was causing damage to Nawakamaru's body, or rather, the spirit base. "You really don't have to do this." Wuming spoke again, although he knew it was useless. "The Ocean Venerable followed me to the end this time, so I can't leave him behind." Then, Nawakamaru changed the topic. "By the way, Sir Hyunryong, have you prepared your trump card?" Wuming nodded and looked in the direction he came from. "Almost, but I still have something to do, and you're here." What Wuming meant was that Nawakamaru could help Wuming complete this matter. "Please tell me, sir. I will not hesitate to go through water and tread on fire." At this moment, Nawakamaru was like a loyal warrior, waiting for the king's order. Wuming smiled at this. "It's not that serious. I just need you to force Tiamat out." "Force her out?" Nawakamaru was stunned. What should she do? And Wuming looked at her hand, or rather, the solar ephemeris in her hand. "I need you to burn the black mud." On the other side, on the sea of black mud, Wuming sat cross-legged on the sea with his eyes closed, as if waiting for something. However, Wuming's shaking fingers showed that Wuming was not just waiting. He was constructing a tactic to summon his trump card. That trump card was not his noble phantasm. He needed the help of Kalas, who was en route, to complete the summoning of this trump card. The reason why Kalas did not say much was that she was focusing on perfecting this trump card. The one who went to rescue Gadotsi and the others was Wuming's doppelganger, which was transformed from a dependent. Except for the only weapon that could not be replicated, Wuming's doppelganger had 100% of Wuming's strength. Other than saving Gudatsi and the others, Wuming's clone had another mission. Wuming's trump card still needed a primer before it could be used. Only when Tiamat truly appeared would he be able to use it. Thus, luring out Tiamat was another mission of the doppelganger. Coincidentally, Quizzard had given the solar almanac to Nawakamaru, so Wuming's doppelganger did not need to do anything else other than use the solar almanac to burn the black mud. Although there was no way to completely burn the black mud, Wuming speculated that as long as a part of it was burned, Tiamat would definitely appear. Wuming guessed that this black mud was most likely something that belonged to Tiamat's body. Thus, as long as a part of it was burned, Tiamat would definitely appear. Wuming, on the other hand, only needed to wait quietly and design a supportive tactic. Suddenly, the eastern side of the sky turned red, and the light of the fire soared. It was obvious that Nawakamaru had begun to use the solar almanac to burn the sea of black mud. And it was also at this moment that the entire sea of black mud, as well as the space of black mud in the southeast where Gudatsi and the others had been trapped, began to produce powerful magical fluctuations. And along with this powerful magical fluctuation, Wuming's trump card, which he had prepared long ago, also began to form a connection with this world. Is Tiamat about to come out? Wuming opened his eyes and looked in the southwest direction, then looked at the sea of black mud beneath him, and took a deep breath. The moment had finally arrived. Wuming was about to activate this trump card that had been born out of a sudden whim. Let's begin, Kalas. Yes, master. After the conversation, Wuming's body seemed to have given up all resistance and accepted the gravitational force, sinking directly into the sea of black mud. On the other side of Wuming's clone, Nawakamaru fell into the sea of black mud, and the solar almanac in her hand burned the black mud around her. The black mud dissipated at a speed visible to the naked eye, but this could be said to be harmless to the sea of black mud. However, calling out Tiamat only required a little stimulation. Whether or not the black mud could evaporate was not within Wuming's consideration. It was just like how mosquitoes sucking blood would not cause much harm to humans, but humans would always react when they realized that their blood was being sucked. Feeling the increasingly turbulent magical power around him, Wuming's clone nodded silently, then waved his hand and opened a teleportation portal beside Nawakamaru. That's enough, Nawakamaru. Return to Uruk. What's next is not something you can handle. Wuming shouted at Nawakamaru. Nawakamaru's spiritual base was gradually collapsing as she released a relic that did not belong to her. If this were to continue, there was no doubt that she would leave. Wuming did not want to kill Nawakamaru. However, Nawakamaru did not seem to hear what Wuming said as she continued to release the flames and lava from the solar almanac. Nawakamaru's face was a little twisted. It seemed like Nawakamaru's mental state was not very good, and she was probably on the verge of turning evil. Wuming controlled the teleportation portal to swallow Nawakamaru, leaving the solar almanac alone. Wuming's clone went to the solar almanac and held it with one hand, injecting a large amount of magical power into it. Since it was a one-time relic, Wuming's clone decided to inject magical power into it before the relic lost its function completely until the solar almanac could no longer take it or dissipate it. The solar almanac was getting more and more ferocious as it received an endless supply of magical power. Countless flames and lava were surging as if they were going to destroy the world, constantly devouring the sea of black mud. This time, it was no longer a mosquito bite, but a venomous worm bite. Then, before the solar almanac could self-destruct, the entire sea of black mud went berserk. Like a deep-sea monster that appeared from the ocean, the sea of black mud soared into the sky like a dragon sucking in water. It was so fast and its range was so wide that it was shocking. Wuming's clone, who was in the range, escaped through the teleportation portal at the last moment with the solar almanac and arrived at where Wuming was previously. The two places were quite far apart, and the sea there was only shaking. Wuming's clone exclaimed as he watched the sky and water turn dark. "It's a little sudden, but this proves that Tiamat is panicking." The solar almanac's movement earlier was considered to have hurt Tiamat. Otherwise, the sea of black mud would not have such a huge movement. After all, it was a one-time relic of the South American master god. After receiving Wuming's massive magical power, even Tiamat could not be unaffected. Wuming raised his hand and looked at the solar almanac that was about to burn out. He made a decision. "It's time for you to fulfill your final mission." Wuming weighed it and then threw it to the place where the sky and water were so dark that he could not see the situation clearly. In the next second, the solar almanac was like the sun that shone on everything, releasing its last ray of light in the sky. A gigantic dragon beast that was many times bigger than the 11 demonic beasts earlier was standing there with its eyes closed. That was Tiamat. Chapter 10:27. Tiamat's body was covered with black mud. At a glance, it was pitch black without any extra color. Her 4 limbs were on the ground in the posture of a beast, and only her mouth was faintly visible with an exaggerated degree of crack. This oppressive feeling, as expected of the goddess of creation. Wuming's doppelganger's tone was full of emotion. It couldn't be helped. Anyone who saw this scene would feel the same way, such as Godatsi and the others who were far away in Uruk. Because of Wuming's vigilance, the 5 magical beasts trapped in Ereshkigal's underworld didn't do anything. After Mayu brought the letter to Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh allowed Mayu to take part of the combat power to the underworld to investigate. After that, Mayu took Enkidu, Funbaba, and Zhuge Kongming, who rarely came out, to the underworld. According to Zhuge Kongming's idea, he restudied the seal of divine right, Dinger, and wanted to find a magical beast to test it out. The 5 magical beasts were indeed as Wuming said. The underworld didn't restrict them. Ereshkigal almost failed. Fortunately, Mayu arrived with reinforcements, and Zhuge Kongming's new seal of divine right, Dinger, was also verified. The price was that the 5 magical beasts died. After that, Ereshkigal didn't continue to stay in the underworld, and Zhuge Kongming also didn't stay in the house. At this moment, everyone, including Ereshkigal and Zhuge Kongming, and those who returned to Uruk, gathered on the southwest city wall, looking at Tiamat's figure in the distance, which was illuminated by the solar calendar stone. Although a large sea of black mud formed Tiamat's body, there was still a large sea of black mud spreading on the ground, and it didn't seem to decrease at all. "That's Tiamat." Godatsi's throat moved. Obviously, she was surprised and afraid of Tiamat. Even Quizzard, Ishtar, Ereshkigal, and other goddesses felt a trace of fear. It was enough to show how powerful Tiamat's deterrence was. Tiamat appeared in the depths of the Persian Gulf, which was the Indian Ocean region. It was thousands of miles away from Uruk city. However, even so, because of Tiamat's huge body, Godatsi and the others could see Tiamat from Uruk. Before this, everyone in Uruk was ordered by Gilgamesh to stay in their homes or temporary residences to pray. They were not allowed to go out and ignore anything that happened outside. Therefore, Tiamat's appearance didn't cause any panic among the humans in Uruk. That's right. That huge dragon beast is the creation mother of Mesopotamia, Tiamat. Merlin walked to the front as a commentator. Tiamat's body was used to create the world, which means that her body must be huge. However, this size is beyond my imagination. Roman's sarcastic voice came from Godatsi's bracelet. However, now wasn't the time to talk about this, right? How are they going to fight such a huge Tiamat god? Doctor, can you still track Assassin's location? Before thinking about how to fight Tiamat, Godatsi was first worried about Wuming. No. It's too far away. Plus, the black mud has a disruptive effect. There's no way to detect Hyunryong's location. However, at this moment, a young voice came into everyone's ears. Brother Wuming is fine. Meiyu looked into the distance with eyes full of trust. Although everyone was baffled by the fact that she was Wuming's sister, Meiyu's aura was indeed Wuming's. It couldn't be fake. Brother Wuming saved my world and Ilya's world. At the same time, he also saved me, Ilya, and Blackie. Brother Wuming saved everyone. This time, I believe that Brother Wuming will also save everyone. That was the trust between Meiyu and Wuming. As soon as those words came out, everyone was no longer worried about Wuming. Even their fear of Tiamat was reduced a lot. Following this atmosphere, Merlin, who acted as a commentator, spoke again. The beast of original sin has appeared. The human's evil will lead to the appearance of the crowned servant. In addition, the appearance of one evil will lead to the birth of another evil. The crowned servant has already appeared. The next thing to be born is a new human's evil. Thus, to fight against the beast of original sin, Merlin's words were ethereal and deeply rooted in people's hearts. The entire Uruk seemed to have heard it, including Gadotsi and the others beside Merlin. In the next second, reflecting Merlin's words, the crowned servant has already appeared. A bell sounded out of thin air. Dang, dang, dang. Gadotsi and Matthew couldn't help but shiver. In the next second, an old man wearing a tattered linen and a hood stood in the middle of the crowd. Huh! Gadotsi and Matthew were shocked. Although the others were shocked by the old man's infiltration method, they didn't show anything because they were used to not showing their emotions. Obeying the will of heaven, the crown assassin, Hassan Sabah, gives the opportunity to live from death. The old man's words were old but full of confidence. Gadotsi, Matthew, and Roman and Leonardo da Vinci in Chaldea were all surprised. This old man was the first Hassan that Gadotsi and the others had asked to see at the Azrael temple? Come on, the evil that represents the opposite of the crown, the existence that has inherited the name of the beast, the apex of evil in the human fire worship sect, the three-headed demonic dragon, appear here. The entire sea of black mud was turbulent, and the source of the turbulence was near the coastline of the former Persian Gulf. In the next second, the turbulence increased, and Uruk City was affected as if there was an earthquake. Then, a huge pure white figure leaped out of the sea of black mud, hovered in the sky a few times, and dispelled part of the black clouds before landing on the sea of black mud. It was a behemoth that was not inferior to Tiamat, but its color was completely opposite to the dark Tiamat. This behemoth was pure white. Like Tiamat, it was like a beast with 4 limbs on the ground, and a pair of folded gray wings on its back. In addition, this pure white behemoth had 3 heads, with a pair of dragon horns on the middle head, a crown on the left head, and nothing on the right head. It seemed lifeless as its head drooped. In addition, the pure white behemoth was holding 2 demonic beasts that were larger than humans in size. They were Musu Maf and Kururu, who had escaped. The black beast and the pure white beast stood opposite each other with their eyes closed, as if waiting for an opportunity. That is? In response to Gadotsi's question, Merlin, as the commentator, continued to speak. One of the evil points in the Persian fire worship sect's mythology, the 3-headed demonic dragon that once destroyed half of the world, Az-Dahaka, has now appeared as another human evil beast. Gadotsi and Matthew were shocked. However, Ishtar, who had almost recovered, noticed a clue. She realized that she had seen the 3-headed demonic dragon's middle head before. Wait? Is this 3-headed demonic dragon transformed by Hyunryong? Hey? Gadotsi and Matthew looked at Ishtar in disbelief. Look, the 3-headed demonic dragon's middle head is basically the same as the head of Hyunryong's dragon body, isn't it? Everyone looked at the place where Ishtar pointed. Gadotsi, Matthew, Quizzard, Leopard Man, and Anna had never seen Wuming's dragon body, so they were not sure. However, Gilgamesh and Nawakamaru definitely knew. When Wuming transformed into his dragon body and fought with Gorgon, although they were still far away, Nawakamaru, as a servant, must have some impression of it. However, the only ones who knew the most were Merlin, the cheater, and Enkidu and Funbaba, who had always been by Wuming's side. Immediately, Enkidu spoke. That's right, that human evil is indeed Hyunryong Sama's transformation. It was summoned by Crown Assassin and another human evil. Human evils were attracted to each other. When a human evil appeared, other human evils would appear in turn. This was destined. And Crown's servant, as the suppression mechanism of human evils, would naturally appear together with human evils. In other words, where human evils appeared, there must be Crown's servant, and where Crown's servant appeared, there must be human evils. However, this became a contradiction. In the end, did the Crown's servant appear first, or did the beast appear first? Wuming relied on Crown Assassin and the double primer to successfully appear as a Crown servant. And as the carrier, naturally, was the three-headed demonic dragon Az Dakaha's body that Wuming obtained from the box world. Chapter 1028. Back then, when Wuming inherited Az Dakaha's human final trial identity in the box and returned to the root, Wuming suddenly had the idea of transferring the human final trial identity to Az Dakaha's body. It was not to revive Az Dakaha, but to reconstruct a new body based on Az Dakaha's body to act as the human final trial's absolute evil. When Wuming entered the Mesopotamia singularity, his spiritual base was forged from Az Dakaha's body. Kalas continued to perfect and refine the concept of the human final trial in the root, adding the concept of the human final trial identity to Wuming's spiritual base created by Az Dakaha. However, later on, after realizing that the enemy was the human evil, Wuming had a new idea: to use the human evil's identity to appear. Merlin also said that the human evil and the crown servant were attracted to each other. If one existed, the other would exist. Likewise, the human evil and the human evil would also attract each other. If one existed, the other would also appear. This was an unbreakable rule. The human final trial identity was similar to the human evil identity itself. Furthermore, Az Dakaha belonged to Persian mythology, and Persia was a part of Mesopotamia. Therefore, with the crown servant assassin and the other human evil as the primer, and with the suppression force behind Wuming giving him some face, the new human evil beast 7 Az Dakaha was naturally born. The human evil seventh beast is Lord Hyunryong's trump card. Because this human evil was controlled by Wuming, although it was harmful to humans, Wuming would not actively harm humans. He would leave the type moon world after eliminating the other human evil, Tiamat, so he would not harm humans. It was even possible that after he left, the human evil would automatically leave him and return to the real beast 7. That's right, the human evil was transformed from the love of the 7 humans. Wuming was only temporarily using a series of methods to appear as the 7th beast, but he did not truly become the human evil. However, if the human evil that inherited the 7th beast remained in the type moon world, it would be qualified to become the new beast and replace the original 7th beast. After all, the scene that Az Dakaha, who inherited the final trial's absolute evil, most wanted to see was the human hero standing on its corpse and advancing towards a better future. In a sense, this was also considered love. After all, the human final trial's absolute evil in the type moon world was an evil that humans had to overcome. It was fully qualified to do so. The human evil against the human evil. This is Hyunryong's trump card. Merlin said the final words. Now, the battle of the beasts that only exists in fantasy is about to begin. Following Merlin's words, Enkidu, who was originally carrying Funbaba, put down Funbaba and flew into the sky. It turned into a dazzling silver chain and flew towards the pure white three-headed demonic dragon, wrapping around its drooping head. In the next second, The three-headed demonic dragon's 3 heads opened their eyes at the same time. Red pupils, blue pupils, and blue pupils appeared in the eyes of the 3 heads respectively. Trinity, huh? Gilgamesh saw the 3-headed demonic dragon's current state. The 3 heads were occupied by 3 different spiritual bases. One of them was Wuming's, another was Enkidu's, and the last one seemed to be Wuming's magic attire. It's rare to see a magic attire with a spiritual base alone, Zhuge Kongming commented. Then, as the 3-headed demonic dragon opened its eyes, Tiamat on the opposite side also opened her eyes, revealing a pair of shining starry eyes. Roar! The 3-headed demonic dragon roared like an ordinary beast. Aer-a! Tiamat let out a mournful cry that sounded like a song. The 2 giant beasts let out their own roars, and then the battle began. After the roar ended, the pure white giant beast casually swallowed Musu Mafu and Kururu as if it was demonstrating its power. Aer-a! The pitch-black giant beast expressed its anger. Its roar contained a powerful magical power, and the sea of black mud was forcefully split apart by this magical power. However, the pure white giant beast wasn't affected by this roar at all. It spread the curled shadow wings on its back. The shadow wings covered the sky and were so huge that they were bigger than the pure white giant beast's body. With the help of the shadow wings, the pure white giant beast flew into the sky. Its mouth contained a white light that could destroy the world, and it suddenly shot it toward the pitch-black giant beast. Dong! The tyrant's halo hit Tiamat, and the white light covered everything in the surroundings. It even covered the solar almanac that had long disappeared, and it lit up the sky and the earth. In an instant it was as bright as day. The Uruk city was very far away from the place where the 2 giant beasts were fighting. Moreover, the Uruk was protected by Wuming's relic, so the battle between the 2 giant beasts wouldn't affect the Uruk at all. Although they didn't know what was going on outside, they still followed Gilgamesh's orders. The humans were still praying in their homes, and they didn't care about what was going on outside. They just prayed that the end of the world would be over as soon as possible. On the city wall in the southwest of Uruk, everyone covered their eyes. There was no other reason as the light was too glaring, and they couldn't see what was going on clearly. However, in the end, everyone walked down the city wall. After all, they couldn't just close their eyes and stare blankly. However, at that moment, everyone understood that the battle between the 2 giant beasts was not something that they could intervene in. If Quizzard wasn't a servant but a god, she could still intervene. However, no matter if it was a servant or a body, they couldn't intervene, including Ishtar. Damn it. Hyunryong, if you lose, I won't forgive you, Ishtar muttered because she couldn't do anything. God bless, Master Hyunryong, you must win. Ishtar glanced at it, and it turned out that her demigod, Ereshkigal, was praying to the god. Hey, are you a god yourself? Ishtar couldn't help but complain. I'm willing, can't I? Ereshkigal blushed and stared back at Ishtar. Although the 2 were half-sisters, they didn't get along well. However, to Ereshkigal's surprise, Ishtar didn't refute Ereshkigal. Instead, she comforted her. Don't worry, Hyunryong won't lose. He saved the Uruk. We just need to believe and wait. Although Ishtar's gentleness was somewhat uncomfortable, Ereshkigal felt good. She remembered what Wuming said at the beginning. It seemed that Wuming didn't lie, Ishtar was actually a good goddess. While Ereshkigal was stunned, Gilgamesh suddenly spoke. Funbaba, with your strength, you should be able to help. Gilgamesh stood in front of Funbaba, who was rubbing her eyes and said so. Master told me to stay here, Funbaba said in a childish voice. Gilgamesh raised his eyebrows, but then Gilgamesh realized why Wuming asked Funbaba to stay here. So that's how it is, you are also a crown. Gudatsi and Matthew were surprised. Roman and Leonardo da Vinci of Chaldea were also surprised. Why does it seem like a crown is cheap? 2 human evils naturally need 2 crowned servants. Hyunryong just let Funbaba temporarily accept the identity of the Crown Rider to maintain the situation of two human evils. Once Funbaba uses her power, the power of the Crown Rider will be lost. In short, he used the contradiction between crown servants and human evils. The first thing to know was that there was no rule that the number of human evils needed to be the same number of crown servants. Originally, the Crown Assassin appeared because of Beast 2, but the Crown Assassin was used by Wuming to pair with his own Beast 7. As a result, the second beast lost its corresponding crown servant. As a result, there must be another crown servant to maintain the balance. Wuming must maintain this state so that the contradiction will not be broken and he can continue to exist. At this moment, Wuming was not the real Beast 7. He could only use this method to make himself appear. Hearing Merlin's clear and logical analysis, everyone was enlightened. However, there was something that Merlin didn't understand. Merlin could understand why the first Hassan cooperated with Wuming's action. After all, the two had met before. But what about Funbaba? She was neither a servant nor a human. How could she take on the title of rider? The reason was that the suppression force was Wuming's backer. He temporarily put the title of rider on Funbaba without the slightest pressure. Wuming paid the price anyway. During the acceptance of the title, Funbaba couldn't use her power. However, Merlin would never know the answer. Chapter 10:29. Outside Gadotsi and the others, the white light that was capable of destroying the world gradually weakened until it disappeared. If Gadotsi and the others came out to take a look, they would be shocked beyond word. This was because the black mud that originally covered the ground had completely disappeared after the white light dissipated. No, it didn't disappear. It had been destroyed by the white light that had destroyed a third of the world. The hegemon's halo, Kvarina, contained an inheritance that could destroy a third of the world. It was known as the strongest gift of the Flash faction in the Box Garden world, and could be said to be Az Dakaha's proudest move. This was because this move was the manifestation of the three-headed dragon's inheritance that had destroyed a third of the world. It was a move that completely belonged to Az Dakaha. Unfortunately, Wuming's spiritual base had fused with Az Dakaha's body. This move that he was so proud of also belonged to Wuming. Wuming had used the ability to destroy a third of the world to choose to destroy the black mud that had covered half of Mesopotamia. Logically speaking, even the hegemon's halo shouldn't be able to destroy half of the black mud in one go. However, this was the black mud of the origin. Wuming only needed to add the power of origin to the hegemon's halo, and it was like a hot knife cutting through butter. It was very easy to destroy the black mud that had come ashore. Even the black clouds in the sky dissipated, revealing the sun in the west. The long period of black clouds caused people's perception of time to become blurry. Even day and night were somewhat blurred. For example, when the solar ephemeris acted as the sun to reflect Tiamat's figure, Gadotsi and the others thought that it was night. Wuming was also one of the people who had such a misunderstanding. Is the day almost over? The three-headed dragon's head with large dragon horns looked at the sun that had already moved to the west and sighed. This head belonged to Wuming. He hadn't done anything, but he realized that more than half the time had passed. Looks like tonight is going to be a sleepless night. Wuming, who was flying in the sky, looked down again. Because Wuming had removed the black mud that surged onto the land, the seawater observatory along the Persian Gulf coast reappeared. However, the lighthouse-like observatory had been broken down in the middle, and the collapsed part was nowhere to be seen. No longer paying attention to the collapsed observatory, Wuming landed on the coast of the Persian Gulf and folded his wings. The black mud on the land had indeed been cleared away by Wuming, but the black mud in the sea was not reduced at all. At this moment, from the Persian Gulf to the Indian Ocean in the distance, the sea surface was pitch black and looked quite muddy. There was basically no seawater, only black mud. After all, the tyrant's halo had destroyed 1/3 of the world. Wuming's ability to wipe out half of the black mud on the continent was already a rare effect. As for wiping out the entire ocean of black mud, Wuming was temporarily unable to do so. This was because the entire Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean connected to it had turned into black mud, and the Indian Ocean could even be called the Black Mud Ocean. As for Tiamat, she was not dead anyway. She was probably thrown into the sea of black mud by Wuming's halo. Just as Wuming was vigilant, a melodious sound wave came from the sea. The three-headed dragon immediately spread its shadow wings, including itself, to block the sound wave. It suddenly spread its wings, and the shadow wings instantly dispersed the sound wave. Master, in the myths, Tiamat didn't have many special abilities, but she was quite good at spirit of speech. The head on the left of the three-headed dragon with a crown suddenly spoke. This was the head controlled by Kalas. Mother is the mother goddess of creation. She doesn't need or have many abilities. Her body is her strongest weapon. This time, it was the head on the right of the three-headed dragon that spoke. This was the head controlled by Enkidu. Indeed, with her huge dragon body, just a casual attack from her is filled with power. In addition to her almost unbeatable authority, she doesn't need any extra power at all. Wuming nodded. The so-called power didn't refer to having fancy abilities, but to being able to defeat the opponent no matter how many or how strong their abilities were. Wuming was almost the same as Tiamat. Ever since Wuming found out that he was the origin dragon, he didn't put much effort into pursuing power because the key to his power was the power of the origin dragon and the powerful body of the origin dragon. It was apparent that Tiamat was the same. Her body was her best weapon. Not only that, but Tiamat also had some terrifying abilities. For example, her authority, the Sea of Life. The Sea of Life had a cell-level forced conversion effect called aminogeas. It could turn any creature that came into contact with or entered her Sea of Life into one of their own. Musasobo Benkei had fallen for this trick. This ability existed before the Black Origin Mud and Tiamat fused. After fusing with the Black Origin Mud, this ability was only strengthened, although it was a little too much. At this moment, the Persian Gulf and the entire Indian Ocean were Tiamat's Sea of Life. Wuming couldn't kill her in the Sea of Life. To give a less precise example, could you die of a common cold while receiving treatment in a famous provincial hospital? Although it was too absolute to say that it was 100%, it was indeed impossible to die from a cold under such conditions. After the song was broken by Wuming, the sea of Black Origin Mud began to stir again. Then, masses of Black Origin Mud surged and condensed, forming a huge body. This was exactly the same as Tiamat's dragon body, but the size was completely different. This time, Tiamat's body was obviously bigger than before. This meant that Tiamat's body was bigger than the three-headed demonic dragon at the moment. Is the entire Sea of Life Tiamat's body? If Wuming was still guessing before, his parents were now certain of it. It seemed that the space that Gudatsi and the others brought with them was indeed inside Tiamat's body. However, why didn't Tiamat attack Gudatsi and the others? Instead, Ishtar only began to move after she blasted a hole in the space. Was Tiamat still asleep? Or was there some other reason? This is troublesome. Wuming realized that he couldn't defeat Tiamat. However, Tiamat shouldn't be able to defeat the three-headed demonic dragon either. Tiamat opened her huge mouth. The sound wave that was full of magic struck again, and this time, it was more powerful than the last time. Wuming dared to say that even if Matthew activated his noble phantasm, he might not be able to block this attack. It was enough to show how powerful the sound wave was. However, it was still useless against the three-headed demonic dragon. At this moment, the three-headed demonic dragon was a powerful existence driven by the fusion of Wu-Ming, Kalas, and Enkidu's spiritual base. Kalas aside, Wu-Ming's spiritual base was the best among the servants, and Enkidu's real body was even more powerful. Together with Kalas, the three of them became a trinity. The three-headed demonic dragon that bore the name of fire worship sect's evil dragon, Azdahaka, was already in existence that no servant could match. No, it should be said that the three-headed demonic dragon at this moment was not an existence that could be defeated simply by having powerful strength. After all, the three-headed demonic dragon's current identity was a human evil, and defeating a human evil often required not only strength, but also wisdom, human wisdom. Both sides were human evil, so neither side could do anything to the other. However, Wu-Ming still had the upper hand at the moment. After all, he was once a human, and the three-headed demonic dragon was a trinity existence. At this moment, Tiamat was facing three existences, which was 3 against 1. That was the advantage that Tiamat did not have. Master, I detected a powerful binding on Goddess Tiamat's body. Binding? Yes, and it seems that Tiamat added the binding herself. Chapter 10:30. Even after fusing with the three-headed demon dragon's spiritual base, Kalas was still able to use her own abilities. That crown was the manifestation of Kalas' ability. Kalas had always been cautious and conscientious. She did all sorts of research, probing, and testing on Tiamat in an attempt to find out what weaknesses she had. The heavens rewarded those who worked hard. Kalas actually managed to discover the problem with Tiamat. That was, Tiamat had self-restraints. Tiamat is the creator goddess of Mesopotamia. The dragon body in front of us can be said to be the spiritual base of Tiamat after she fell and became a beast. Even so, Tiamat is still extremely powerful. However, the strange thing is, the Tiamat that we fought against wasn't as powerful as we thought. Wu-Ming voiced out the strange that Kalas mentioned. That's right, Master. When Tiamat fought against us, she didn't display much power. This is the strangest thing. Even without Wu-Ming, the current Tiamat wasn't undefeatable or despairing to Gudatsi and the others. That was, Tiamat didn't have an overwhelming and decisive ability. This wasn't something that a creator goddess should have. The only ability that Tiamat still had was the Sea of Life. However, it could even block Nabistan's Fong for a while. It couldn't be considered an overwhelming ability. The Sea of Life couldn't even compare to Wu-Ming's Hegemon's Halo. At the very least, the Hegemon's Halo could instantly destroy the black mud on the ground, while the Sea of Life couldn't instantly flood the ground. However, even if Tiamat has self-restraints, we can't do anything to her. Wu-Ming was not facing the problem of weakening Tiamat, but the problem of not being able to stop Tiamat. Wu-Ming wasn't afraid of Tiamat, who didn't have overwhelming power, but he couldn't defeat Tiamat or stop Tiamat's actions. Tiamat's Sea of Life covered the entire Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. If they did not destroy it completely, there was no way to defeat Tiamat. This was what Wu-Ming couldn't do to Tiamat. The reason why Tiamat couldn't do anything to Wu-Ming was because Tiamat didn't have any overwhelming moves. No, Master, you conceal Tiamat, Kalas suggested to Wu-Ming. Kalas was an artificial spirit that supported the top magic attire. When it was first created, it had extremely high intelligence and could deal with all kinds of situations. Later on, Kelly became Wu-Ming's noble artifact, and had undergone the baptism of the origin together with Wu-Ming's main body, which made her stand out from the rest. Regardless of whether it was the magical attire's performance or the artificial elf's wisdom, she was far ahead of the rest. Since Kalas was able to suggest this, the idea was feasible. You're saying that I should use the 12 incarnations? But I can't use it in this state. Wu-Ming could use it previously because the spiritual base of human evil wasn't completed, so it left behind a self-protection mechanism. Now that human evil's spiritual base was completed, Wuming's original abilities were temporarily lost. After all, this was a human evil spiritual base that was transformed from the corpse of the three-headed demonic dragon, Az-Dakaha. To activate this spiritual base, it even required the trinity of Wuming, Enkidu, and Kalas. Although this spiritual base was unprecedentedly powerful, there were also many disadvantages. Wuming's inability to use his own abilities was one of them. This spiritual base was considered a complete product in terms of strength, but in other aspects, it was still considered a half-finished product. It could be modified in the future, but now wasn't the time to do so. Master, this spiritual base contains a sovereign sun and 2 simulated star map. They can be used by you. When Kala said that, Wuming couldn't help but be stunned. Of course, I know that Az-Dakaha has a Vesta, but whether it can be used on Tiamat is another matter. The three-headed demonic dragon, fire worship sect, came from Mesopotamia. The Avesta's user was a three-headed demonic dragon, so it couldn't be used on humans or fire worship sect's abilities. The former was because this was the final trial for humans, while the latter was because of homology. Although Tiamat wasn't a god that belonged to fire worship sect directly, fire worship sect's roots were still in Mesopotamia. The box garden world was particular about inheritance. Mesopotamia and fire worship sect had deep connections, so this ability might not be used. Moreover, Avesta didn't have the sealing effect. Also, you said that there are additional simulated star maps in Az-Dakaha's body? Wuming was a little moved. Having a simulated star map was a great fortune for anyone, but Az-Dakaha had too. How could Wuming not be moved? It was normal that Wuming didn't know about Az-Dakaha's gift. When Az-Dakaha's spirit had died, Wuming had placed his body in the gift card and returned to the root for Kalas to transform. Because his physical body was still alive, the power that existed in Az-Dakaha's body wouldn't be like when Silent killed Maxwell, which resulted in a falling object. Only the tyrant's halo was used by Az-Dakaha in front of Wuming. As for Avesta, Az-Dakaha didn't even have time to use it before it was sealed by Wuming's golden sword. Wuming had heard about Avesta's specific effects from Galgi. Forget it. Kalas, control the body. Enron, help me. I'll go inside and take a look. Yes, Master. Yes, Master Hyunryong. After Wuming finished speaking, the middle head of the three-headed demonic dragon drooped down as if it had lost its soul. After that, the three-headed demonic dragon's entire body was controlled by Kalas with Enkidu assisting from the side. The three-headed demonic dragon once again gathered the tyrant's halo in its mouth. Even if it couldn't kill Tiamat, it had to constantly interfere. Tiamat, on the other hand, let out a sorrowful and angry song. On the surface of the Sea of Life, something seemed to have appeared and began to shake. Inside the spirit base. When Wuming said to take a look inside, he meant to go to the depths of the spirit base to take a look. The three-headed demonic dragon was a trinity, and Wuming, who was one of them, could naturally do this easily. Wuming, who had turned into a ball of consciousness, came to the interior of the spirit base. In front of Wuming, there were 3 balls of light. 2 of them emitted the starry light of the universe, while the remaining 1 emitted the light of the sun. There was no doubt that this was a sun sovereignty and 2 simulated star map creation. Wuming reached out his hand to one of the simulated star map creation and immediately sensed the effect and name of this simulated star map creation. Is this Avesta? Wuming's hand separated from the ball of light and no longer cared about it. Then, the remaining 2 are the sun sovereignty and the additional simulated star map creation that Kalas mentioned. Wuming placed his 2 hands on the balls of light without hesitation. In an instant, the information of the sun sovereignty and simulated star map creation was transmitted to Wuming's mind. Dragon's sun sovereignty and simulated star map creation. Virtual star Itaisway. Chapter 1031. This simulated star map is interesting. Wu-Ming showed a thoughtful expression. When Az Dakaha had fought with Wu-Ming, he had only used the new ability that he had obtained after assimilating with the Black Origin Mud. He had not used any of his original abilities. Even if he had used it, he had only used the Hegemon's Halo. Wu-Ming had thought that Az Dakaha had underestimated his opponent. However, it seemed that this was not the case at all. The reason why Az Dakaha had not used his own abilities was because those abilities would not have any effect on Wu-Ming. Az Dakaha had two powerful gifts. One was the simulated star map, Avesta, and the other was the Hegemon's Halo, Kvarina. The former made Az Dakaha invincible in the box world, while the latter was Az Dakaha's signature. Possessing the former was enough for Az Dakaha. What the strong possessed was not some flashy ability, but the ability to defeat the enemy. Eating the world with a single move also existed. However, there were times when one trick to eat everything did not work. For example, Az Dakaha and Tiamat. The reason why Az Dakaha had the Dragon's Sun sovereignty and the simulated star map, Virtual Star Taisui, was because Az Dakaha had naturally fused with his body when he broke the seal. That's right. Just like the no-name flag was one of the items that broke the seal, these two items were items that sealed Az Dakaha. The Dragon's Sun sovereignty only had the effect of strengthening the spirit core. However, every simulated star map had restrictions. Coincidentally, Virtual Star Taisui's restrictions prevented Az Dakaha from using it. Avesta was also useless against Wu-Ming because Az Dakaha couldn't absorb, cancel, or borrow the power of the Origin. It could only use its new ability after combining with the Black Origin Mud to deal with Wu-Ming. This was why Az Dakaha didn't use its own ability. It was the same for Tiamat. The Sea of Life could be said to be the bane of all things, but after fusing with the Black Origin Mud, Wu-Ming developed a resistance, because Wu-Ming and the Black Origin Mud were of the same origin. In addition, Tiamat had sealed herself, causing Tiamat to be unable to take down Wu-Ming. Wu-Ming was also facing the same problem at this moment. The ability of the Trinity as Daka, one of the 7 great human evils, was also unable to destroy Tiamat. Therefore, when one move was no longer fresh and could no longer dominate the world, a new move was needed. And Kalas found a new move for Wu-Ming, which was the illusory star Taisui. Through the contact of his arm with the ball of light, Wu-Ming also learned of the illusory star Taisui's ability. It ignored all conditions and forcefully sealed natural gods and star spirit. This was the ability of the illusory star Taisui. And Tiamat happened to be a natural god. This was the method that Kalas had mentioned, to seal Tiamat. After Kalas's adjustment, the Dragon's Sun sovereignty and the simulated star map illusory star Taisui in Az Dakaha's body had completely become this spiritual base's item, or rather, its ability. Therefore, Wu-Ming could ignore the restrictions of the illusory star Taisui and use it directly. Then, let's begin. After Wu-Ming finished speaking, the ball of light that his right hand touched emitted a huge amount of starlight, which instantly enveloped Wu-Ming's consciousness. In the outside world, the 3-headed demonic dragon controlled by Kalas was hunting down Tiamat's the 11 sons. That's right, the 11 sons of Tiamat were born from the Sea of Life again, and in terms of strength, they were even stronger than the previous 11. However, it was all in vain. One after another, the demonic beasts were killed by the 3-headed demonic dragon. Sun-like flames shot out from the Sun Lion's mouth and attacked the 3-headed demonic dragon. The pure white 3-headed demonic dragon threw away the corpse of the demonic beast that had died long ago. It then clawed at the fire of the sun, causing it to explode. Following that, the 3-headed demonic dragon gathered the flames and flashes that had once destroyed 1/3 of the world in its mouth and engulfed the lion. The sky had become dark at some point, and the storm carried a tornado that swept toward the three-headed demonic dragon like a petrel. The three-headed demonic dragon spread its shadow wings, which turned into a curtain that covered the sky and directly cut the tornado in half. However, the curtain did not stop. As if it had a life of its own, it directly slashed at the dark mass in the sky and instantly cut it in half. The last two demonic beasts, Ugger and Deblutu, were eliminated. At this point, the 11 newborn demonic beasts were all killed by the three-headed demonic dragon. However, when the three-headed demonic dragon was eliminating the 11 sons, Tiamat was not idle. Another strange song was heard. Suddenly, the entire Sea of Life was in a riot as if it was boiling. In the next second, the 11 sons reappeared from the Sea of Life. No, not only 11 demonic beasts, but more and more demonic beasts emerged from the Sea of Life. Moreover, all of them had the same strength as the 11 sons. Without a doubt, this move was the product of the fusion of Tiamat and the Black Origin mud. It was impossible for Tiamat alone to give birth to so many powerful demonic beasts in such a short time. Among them, the most numerous and the most powerful was the winged Ram. When Wuming controlled the three-headed demonic dragon, he used the tyrant's halo to clean up the Black Origin mud on the land. At the same time, he also cleaned up the Ramu and the few mermaid Kururu that were scattered all over the land. There were no longer any demonic beasts on the land except for the sea. Any one of these demonic beasts had the strength to rival or even defeat goddesses such as Ishtar, Quizzard, and Ereshkigal. Looking at the number of demonic beasts, if all of them swarmed up, the entire Mesopotamia would probably be destroyed quickly. The Uruk's protective shield would definitely not be able to protect them. However, the three-headed demonic dragon did not panic when it saw this scene. The chain wrapped around the right head extended and the tip of the chain gently scratched the huge dragon's body. PFFF? The three-headed demonic dragon's body was sliced open like a hot knife through butter. A sizable wound was cut open, and fresh blood spilled out as if it was free of charge. The spilled blood did not fall into the Sea of Life. Instead, it turned into white figures with small shadow wings and flew into the air. They were miniature versions of Azhi-Dakaha. Azhi-Dakaha's innate ability was that its blood could turn into a two-headed dragon with god-level strength. This spiritual base was based on Azhi-Dakaha's body, so it naturally included this ability. Moreover, it was an upgraded version. The blood didn't transform into a two-headed dragon, but a miniature version of Azhi-Dakaha. Roar! The miniature versions of Azhi-Dakaha let out a huge roar that was different from their tiny bodies. They rushed towards the demonic beasts that were several times or even dozens of times larger than them. The huge demonic beasts that emerged from Tiamat's Sea of Life also met the miniature versions of Azhi-Dakaha. At this moment, the head in the middle of the three-headed demonic dragon seemed to come back to its senses and became energetic. Chapter 1032. Master, you're back. As soon as Wuming returned, Kalus relinquished control of the body to Wuming. I've come into contact with the illusory star Taisue's ability, and I can activate it at any time. As Wuming spoke, he observed the current battlefield and couldn't help but frown. The reason was naturally because of the current situation. Firstly, the number of magical beasts that Tiamat gave birth to shocked Wuming. Secondly, the three-headed dragon army couldn't defeat the magical beast army and was now retreating. As the number of winged Rama was the highest, both sides were basically fighting in the air, and only a small number of them were fighting on the sea. Whether it was on the sea or in the sky, the three-headed dragon army was retreating. It couldn't be helped. In terms of individual strength, the magical beasts that Tiamat gave birth to were much stronger than the three-headed dragon formed from the three-headed dragon's blood. Even if these three-headed dragons could continue to divide their blood, each individual that was split was weaker than its superior individual. This was the main reason for the phenomenon of them retreating. Wu Ming immediately had the thought of, I can't delay any longer. Illusory star Taisui activate. Wu Ming didn't need to follow the rules to activate the simulated star map, so he only needed to shout or even think about it to activate it. The majestic voice from the three-headed dragon's body was transmitted to the void. All the three-headed dragons and magical beasts that were fighting to the death, including Tiamat, were stunned. The former was due to the deterrence of Wu Ming's voice, while the latter was purely due to fear. In the next second, a cluster of light that emitted a cosmic starlight emerged from the three-headed dragon's body. The petite size of the cluster of light created a sense of contrast with the three-headed dragon's huge body. However, the threat that the cluster of light brought to Tiamat was far greater than that of the three-headed dragon. A sound wave that was more powerful than before materialized and attacked the three-headed dragon. The three-headed dragon army and magical beast army that were in the path of the sound wave attack were all shattered into powder by the sound wave. Faced with Tiamat's move that was different from the past, Wu Ming became serious. The three-headed demon dragon opened its mouth, and a beam of light belonging to the tyrant's halo enveloped the incoming sound wave, instantly extinguishing the sound wave's follow-up attack. It was a flash of starlight, shot out from Tiamat's eyes of the stars, hidden behind the sound wave. It seemed that Tiamat was also anxious. Wu Ming didn't waste any more time and had Su Xing Taisui take action. You are no longer needed here, primordial goddess of creation. Leave this world that no longer belongs to you. In front of Wu Ming, Void Star Taisui's sphere of light fell into the sea of life, and Tiamat's enormous body stopped moving. Tiamat seemed to let out a final cry. In the next second, Tiamat's huge body turned into black mud and merged into the sea. The magical beasts that were born in the sea of life were also turned into black mud and fell into the sea. The dark clouds in the sky had already dispersed, and the sun had completely sunk into the west. Night had fallen. In the central region of Mesopotamia, in the fortress city of Uruk, it was nighttime. At this moment, a circle of lights surrounded the Uruk. The Uruk city was also brightly lit. People were celebrating. In order to celebrate the end of the world, Gilgamesh ordered the soldiers to set up a venue in the Uruk city and even outside the Uruk city for people to dance, eat, and thank the god. The reason why the venue was set up outside the Uruk city was because the Uruk city was not enough to accommodate everyone's celebration. After all the humans in the Mesopotamia region were gathered in the Uruk city at this time. In the current season, the night was not cold. In addition, the outside of the Uruk had been purified by the sea of black mud. The magical beasts had completely disappeared, and there was no need to worry about being attacked. In the Divine Tower, Gudatsi and the others gathered together to enjoy the fruits of victory after the end of the world. However, because the outside of the Uruk had been affected by the sea of black mud, there were very few pastures and farms, and there was a shortage of food. Only a few pastures and farms in the north of the Uruk were still intact. However, this did not change the fact that there was a shortage of resources. Therefore, Gudatsi and the others, as well as the Uruk people outside the Divine Tower, did not have much food to enjoy. The pastures and farms had to be reserved for grain, cattle, and sheep in order to prepare for the future life of the humans in Mesopotamia. Therefore, the people were just immersed in the atmosphere of surviving the disaster. At most, they would dance and eat very little. Of course, this included Gudatsi and the others. In the center of a large room in the Divine Tower, a large dining table was placed there. Gudatsi and the others sat around the table and tasted good wine. Although there was not much food, Gilgamesh could still provide drinks for Gudatsi and the others to drink freely. Of course, Gudatsi, Matthew, Mayu, and Anna were drinking drinks and not wine. The Leopard Man and Funbaba were playing in an open space at the side. Enkidu, who was worried about Funbaba, was paying attention to Funbaba while having a conversation with Gilgamesh that he had not had for many years. Although Gilgamesh was more or less not used to the fact that his close friend had a gender, a close friend was still a close friend. This would not change. Zhuge Kong Ming and Leonidas I sighed at the sweet and mellow taste of the wine in their hands. Nawakamaru, who was beside them, was drinking alone as if he was mourning for Musasobo Benkei. Quizzard and Ishtar clinked their glasses. Ishtar also poured a glass of wine for the absent-minded Ereshkigal, which gave Ereshkigal a fright. It was only after Mayu, who was beside her, said something to Ereshkigal that Ereshkigal calmed down. Matthew and Gudatsi gently tasted the drinks that Gilgamesh brought out. Gudatsi, who was beside Anna, was also tasting the delicious drink because of Merlin's harassment. She had to pretend that she did not care about the delicious drink. Everyone was immersed in the celebration dinner of Tiamat being defeated by Wuming, but because Wuming was not present, many people were more or less absent-minded. For example, Mayu, Ereshkigal, Anna, Gudatsi, and Matthew. However, Wuming was not dead, he was not there. What the hell is holding Assassin back? Gudatsi and Matthew chatted and complained softly. However, everyone present was a servant, and Gudatsi's soft complaint was equivalent to speaking directly in their ears. That, I also want to know, after Ereshkigal spoke weakly, Mayu, who was beside her, looked a little shaken, and Anna's eyes also drifted. Gudatsi and Ereshkigal's questions attracted everyone's attention, except for the leopard man. Ishtar looked at Ereshkigal, who became absent-minded again, and shook her head helplessly. Didn't Golden Sparkle say that Hyunryong is now implementing the follow-up work on Tiamat on the coast of the Persian Gulf? He will be here in a while. You guys don't seem to see that guy. Did he take your souls away or something? Ishtar's criticism made Ereshkigal's face turn red. She naturally knew that Gilgamesh said that Wuming was on the Persian Gulf, but Wuming was not there. Not only her, but Gudatsi and the others also couldn't help but be absent-minded. And Ereshkigal had a feeling that Ishtar was actually worried about Wuming, but she didn't directly show it. Therefore, Ereshkigal and Ishtar quarreled again. Humph! What does it have to do with you that I care about him? You greedy goddess, do you want to take away other people's thoughts? What did you say? You despicable guy? At that moment, Ishtar also became angry and stared at Ereshkigal. Seeing this, Gudatsi no longer expected to get any information from the sisters, and then turned to look at Enkidu. Seeing Gudatsi looking at him, Enkidu showed a warm smile to Gudatsi. Don't worry, Sir Wuming is indeed dealing with some aftermath matters. He will be back soon. On the coast of the Persian Gulf, Wuming, who had already returned to his human form from the three-headed demonic dragon, was sitting on the collapsed observatory with a light ball in his hand. His eyes were closed as if he was immersed in it. The dragon horn headdress on his head was dutifully guarding Wuming. Unfortunately, there was no danger around at this time. Chapter 1033. Ever since the void star Taisway sealed the entire sea of life that represented Tiamat, the Persian Gulf and even the Indian Ocean returned to their original ocean state. Other than the fact that no living creatures could be seen, the ocean at this moment was no different from before. After that, Wuming also removed the three-headed demonic dragon state, but the spiritual base of human evil still existed. After all, the transformation of the spiritual base was basically complete, and it could not be changed back even if he wanted to. However, there was one thing to note. Wuming could not recreate the three-headed demonic dragon's body with Enkidu and Kalas for the time being. After all, the three-headed demonic dragon's human evil spiritual base was only possible because of the blessings of Tiamat, the first Hassan, and Funbaba, who had temporarily obtained the title of Crown Rider. Now that Tiamat was sealed, and the first Hassan had left after the crisis was over. The crown rider on Funbaba had also disappeared. Naturally, the three-headed demonic dragon's form could not be maintained. In other words, it was already a miracle that Wuming could still exist with this spiritual base at this moment. Now that the connection had collapsed, it should have been forced to leave this world. It could only be said that it was convenient to have someone at the top. The reason why Wuming was sitting here was because the Void Star Taisui had sealed Tiamat's light ball. Because the spiritual base of Wuming's human evil was still there, the Void Star Taisui would not disappear, and the sealed light ball would not dissipate. The reason why Wuming was sitting here and sealing the light ball was actually that he was trying to take out the black mud that had fused with the Sea of Life. After all, the existence that had fused with the black mud would naturally be hostile to Wuming, and Wuming could not sit idly by and do nothing about the black mud. In addition, the foundation of human evil was the love for other humans. No matter what, Wuming still had sympathy for Tiamat. Especially after Wuming studied the light ball and came into contact with Tiamat's will for a while. It really makes people sigh. Wuming opened his eyes and let out a long sigh. He had no way of completely removing the black soil from Tiamat's Sea of Life. This could only be done after he returned to the Great Origin. During this time, Wuming felt Tiamat's thoughts. I miss the children. I want to come into contact with the children. I want the children to return to my arms, but I'm afraid of bringing harm to the children. This was Tiamat's extremely simple thinking. Wuming could use his origin power to kill Tiamat the same way he had killed Az Dakaha, but Wuming couldn't bring himself to do it. Aziz Dakaha's evil was because he wanted justice to stand on his corpse, while Tiamat's evil was simply a mother's instinct to care for her child who had abandoned her, as well as the world that did not need her. And this mother was also afraid that she would harm her child. Otherwise, she would not have placed a self-seal on herself. Tiamat had only been chosen to become a bug in the human system. This bug had to be fixed in order for the system called humans to continue. And this bug had been created by using the love for humans. Fixing the false love that had been forced to become was a little cruel in Wuming's eyes. Aziz Dakaha had already died at Wuming's hands. Wuming did not want another existence similar to Aziz Dakaha to follow in his footsteps. However, it was obviously impossible to let Tiamat go just like that. Fortunately, I have the illusory star Taisui. If not for this, I'm afraid it would have reached a point where only one of us could live. Ignoring all conditions to seal a natural god, although the target audience was small, the effect was unexpectedly powerful. If not for this, it was hard to say who would die in the end. Wuming felt a headache at the thought of so many powerful magical beasts that had been born from the Sea of Life. And fortunately, those magical beasts were formed from the black soil in the Sea of Life. They were also a part of Tiamat. Otherwise, Wuming would not have a good way to deal with so many magical beasts at once. And if the time was delayed, who knew how many magical beasts Tiamat could give birth to? The Sea of Life was so big, and Tiamat had the support of the black soil. Who knew what would happen in the end? Therefore, this was why Wuming believed that the outcome was still uncertain. In any case, let's bring Tiamat back to the root of life first. Once they returned to the root of life, there would definitely be a way. After all, the root of life was the source of miracles, and Wuming was a god inside. Wuming shook his head and rested for a while. After relieving his fatigue, he merged the ball of light into his body and stood up. Wuming looked at the position of the stars in the sky and estimated the time. At this time, Tachika and the others probably haven't finished their banquet. I should still be able to make it, probably. If not for the last two words. But Wuming knew that the Uruk was short of resources at the moment, so he did not expect to be able to eat delicious food. Let's go join in the fun. Wu Ming turned around, and his body disappeared into the portal that had opened at some point in time. Then, the portal closed. On the coast of the Persian Gulf, there was only the night wind blowing the waves and hitting the rocks in boredom. Uruk. Although the Uruk was still brightly lit, most people had collapsed on the ground. Don't get me wrong, they were asleep. They reeked of alcohol, and even some children were no exception. But only a few children reeked of alcohol. This was the scene that Wuming sensed when he walked out of the portal that appeared in the sky. Gil really put in a lot of effort this time. I'm afraid the Uruk has run out of alcohol. Alcohol could not replace food, and the people who listened to the king did not drink because of the influence of the apocalypse. So, there was still a lot of alcohol left in the Uruk. There was not much food, so they drank, sang, and danced. This was how the Uruk citizens celebrated tonight. And because the tense minds were relaxed, there were many people who had fallen asleep in and out of the brightly lit Uruk. By the way, most children just fell asleep after relaxing their minds. There were not many children who secretly drank. Although this era was thousands of years away from the modern era, Gilgamesh still protected the children well. After all, children were the future of mankind. No longer paying attention to the scene inside and outside the Uruk, Wuming flew straight to the God Tower. Anyway, the night was not cold in this season, and there were no beasts outside. Let them sleep. At most, they would have a stiff neck because of the wrong sleeping posture when they woke up the next day. After entering the God Tower, Wuming went directly to the room where Gadotsi and the others held the banquet. In the corridor near the door, Wuming met Siduri. Siduri, haven't you gone to rest yet? When Gilgamesh was slacking, Siduri was the manager. After all, the Uruk citizens couldn't hold a banquet without a manager. Otherwise, it would really be chaotic. Seeing that it was Wuming, Siduri bowed first. I'm not tired, Master Hyunryong. Have you finished your work? As an insider, Siduri naturally knew from Gilgamesh and Enkidu that Wuming had something to do in the Persian Gulf and hadn't returned yet. Yes, I've finished my work. I came back to see if I can make it in time for the banquet. Immediately, Siduri smiled. You're late. Master Hyunryong, Master Ishtar, and the others have all left. Miss Tachika and Miss Matthew are also asleep at the table. I just met Master Enkidu and asked me to send a towel over. Siduri said and raised a piece of white cloth in her hand. It was a wool towel that could be used to cover the body. Even if it was not cold at night, Enkidu was still very caring. Wuming nodded as if he understood, then reached out and took the towel in Siduri's hand. Then I'll send it over. Ignoring Ishtar and the other goddesses and Enkidu, he was going to see Gadotsi and Matthew first. Oh right, Siduri, go and rest now. Immediately, this is the will of the gods. After Wuming finished speaking, he directly left. In response, Siduri smiled. Master Hyunryong is really just like Master Enkidu, gentle. Chapter 1034. Wuming had seen how hard Siduri had worked during this period of time. She was not much more relaxed than Gilgamesh. At this time, how could Wuming allow Siduri to continue working? However, with Siduri's character, it was certainly impossible for her to rest by herself, so Wuming could only order her. He walked quietly into the room where Gadotsi and others were gathered. At this moment, the room was exuding the aroma of good wine. There was no doubt that this was Gilgamesh's collection of good wine. Wuming even suspected at this moment that Gadotsi and others fell asleep because of the smell of wine. As soon as he entered the room, Wuming saw Gadotsi and Matthew sleeping soundly on the table. The others were nowhere to be seen. Ishtar and the others must have left on their own, and someone like Leonidas I, who got drunk easily, must have been carried away by them. In addition to Gadotsi and Matthew, who were lying on the table, Gilgamesh was looking at the brightly lit Uruk by the window with his hands on his chest. Oh Hyunryong, you're finally here. Gilgamesh looked back at Wuming. I thought I could make it in time for the banquet, but it seems that I'm late. He walked quietly to Gudatsi and Matthew, covered them with a thin towel, and then Wuming walked to Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh set up runes around Gudatsi and Matthew, so he didn't have to worry about disturbing Gudatsi and Matthew. There wasn't much food, but this king left some good wine for you. Gilgamesh showed a king's smile, and then golden ripples appeared from his body. 2 golden wine cups and a golden wine jug emerged from it. Gilgamesh held the golden wine jug, poured it into 2 golden goblets, and then threw one of them to Wuming. The wine cup flew lightly to Wuming as if it had a life of its own. Wuming didn't use much strength and easily caught it, then drank it in one gulp. Although this wine is delicious, it's not to my taste. Wuming threw the empty wine cup away, and the golden wine cup turned into golden particles and dissipated. This king is the same. Gilgamesh also drank it without caring about his image, and like Wuming, he threw the golden wine cup and golden wine jug aside, letting them turn into golden particles and return to the king's treasure. No matter how sweet the wine created by the gods is, it is still an existence that this king and humanity must abandon. This was the reason why it was not to his taste. Without responding to Gilgamesh's words, Wuming walked to Gilgamesh's side. With his back facing Gilgamesh, Wuming stood in front of the window and looked at the starry sky. The Uruk people survived and you are still alive. The Sumer dynasty can continue and human civilization can continue. When Wuming took away Tiamat, who was sealed in the illusory star Taisway, this singularity would also be repaired and returned to the right track. What Wu Ming meant was that it was time for him to leave. After all, his purpose was to help Gudatsi and Matthew repair the singularity, and to make up for Wuming's regret of leaving Mesopotamia. Whether it was the Gilgamesh of that world, or Wuming, who took care of Gilgamesh's childhood, was already half a father to Gilgamesh. I know you won't forget what happened here, and I also know you know very well that the Gilgamesh I am familiar with is the queen. Although because of the suppression force, Uruk Hyunryong existed in every parallel world, and there was a story between Gilgamesh and Hyunryong, it was impossible for Gilgamesh not to notice this. After all, the stories created by different genders could not be exactly the same. This was for sure. Of course. Gilgamesh, who turned around, nodded without hesitation. After all, the Hyunryong this king is familiar with can be said to be a woman. You can't be the one this king is familiar with. Wuming was shocked. It must be the doing of the 2 suppression forces. Did it have to be so exciting? Ha 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 ha, this king is joking. It's so nice to see your face. Gilgamesh patted Hyunryong's shoulder as if his scheme succeeded, and he laughed very happily. However, not long after, Gilgamesh stopped laughing. But this king is really happy to see you. After patting Wuming's shoulder again, Gilgamesh left the room. At this moment, only Wuming, who was looking at the night sky, and the sleeping Gudatsi and Matthew were left in the room. Me too, Gil. As for what Gilgamesh said about Hyunryong in this parallel world being a woman, it was unknown whether Gilgamesh was joking or not. Early the next morning, Gudatsi woke up groggily and found herself lying on the bed in her and Matthew's room in the Chaldean embassy, and Matthew was lying next to her. Hey! Hey hey hey! As if she thought of something terrible, Gudatsi's face turned red, and she screamed in horror. What happened, Senior? Matthew had a conditioned reflex because of Gudatsi's scream. He suddenly woke up from his sleep and sat up. No, nothing, I just woke up and had a nightmare. Gudatsi was silently relieved. After all, she found that the clothes she was wearing did not change. It seemed that someone sent her and Matthew back here and put them directly on the bed. Suddenly, a voice came from the corner. Are you awake, Tachika, Matthew? Gudatsi and Matthew looked and found that it was Wuming. Assassin? Did you send me and Matthew back? Gudatsi guessed. Wuming, who was sitting cross-legged in the corner, nodded. Seeing that you were sleeping soundly, I didn't wake you up. Instead, I sent you back here. Wuming pointed to the bed where Gadotsi and Matthew were, and then pointed to the corner where he was, and then continued to speak. I didn't know where to go, so I just stayed. But don't worry, I didn't stare at your sleeping faces the whole night. Wuming smiled. However, the more Wuming said this, the more embarrassed Gadotsi and Matthew felt. Then, I'll go down first. Gadotsi immediately got up from the bed and walked out of the room. Senior Villo, I'm a little worried about you. I'll go downstairs and take a look. Then Matthew also left with a blushing face. In this regard, Wuming smiled. Gadotsi and Matthew were really quite cute. By the way, last night, Wuming did not stay because he had nowhere to go, nor did he stay to see Gadotsi and Matthew's sleeping faces. The reason why Wuming stayed in Gadotsi and Matthew's room was because Roman contacted Wuming through Gadotsi's bracelet last night. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.